I saw you gesture, Donald. So, of course, sooner or later, we are going to call on you to sing us a song, but not today. We'll give you a break. For those just joining us, welcome to the Kenneth Smith Seminar. This is our Millennia in Microcosm arc that's been going on for 4.5 years. This is week 184 of Millennia in Microcosm, and we are focusing on medieval civilization as we have been for the past year and a half. We are in chapter 9 of Millennia in Microcosm, paragraph 5. There's a link in the chat you can click on to get to the text. It will take you to chapter 9, and you can just scroll down to the fifth paragraph. And we're gonna spend a little more time talking about this. One of the things that I noticed while I was prepping for today is my habit in the last 6 months of interspersing original source material from medieval and proto-medieval writers into the seminar. It has the effect of spreading out our discussion of Kenneth Smith's text. And sometimes that means that we we miss connections to earlier parts because although it was only one paragraph above, it's been 4 months since we were there, so we lose the connections. And so I want to treat paragraph 5 as a whole and kind of reference backwards a few things, because it's one of his juicy paragraphs. There is a lot packed into paragraph 5. So I'm gonna throw the text in here for us to look at. We did the first few sentences of this the last several weeks, and I'll read us through it in a moment. And what we were focusing on last week was the issue of somnambulism, going through a dream state. We did a whole bunch of Heraclitus, because this is part of the key to reading Kenneth Smith. Is you're looking for his keywords. You're looking for his keywords, and his keywords will connect you to quotes, because the way he writes these things is he thinks about the subject he wants to write about. He collects all the best quotes he knows on the topic that are relevant to what he wants to say. He immerses himself in them and then uses them like strange attractors to help him organically shape the flow of his writing. So he's kind of moving from one strange attractor to another in the course of making his argument. And if you know what those references are, you know what those allusions are, then you understand that he's never saying just what you think he's saying. He's also kind of yanking into the conversation, tagging in other philosophers, other writers, other artists, and the references are sometimes subtle, and sometimes they're just hit you over the head, and he actually puts the quote in. But you really want to be aware of the full juiciness that is present in this. He did a reference in an earlier paragraph, to the cloud of unknowing. Does anybody remember we were talking about some months back, the cloud of unknowing? Let me locate that here. Here it is. Here it is. This cloud of unknowing. Let me throw this quote in here. This is from paragraph 4. It's from the paragraph before. And I followed up on it today. I was like, cloud of unknowing, and it's in quotes. Kenneth put it in quotes. That's interesting. I wonder if that's a reference to something. And it turns out it is a reference to something. Let's take a quick look at that. This sets up, right? It's the paragraph immediately before 5. It sets up paragraph 5. This cloud of unknowing, the unexamined life, normalized as an ultimate beyond whose limits no one may go, is not pure and simple innocent provincialism or ethnocentrism, such as existed for millennia before there were telemedia or even dispersion of the printed word. It seems self-contained as a sentence, as a thought, and that's how we treated it. We just went through this sentence on our way to other things, this opening to paragraph 4, the previous paragraph. But I discovered I read past something I shouldn't have read past. Cloud of unknowing is not only a reference, it's actually a quote. He's being very specific here. And it is a reference to, wait for it, a book titled The Cloud of Unknowing. I don't know, I just went right over my head. Sometimes with Kenneth, you can miss these things, even when I'm looking for it and I'm trying to be helpful here. So, The Cloud of Unknowing is a medieval work of Christian mysticism. Here is a reference to it. I'm going to put the link in the chat to Wikipedia where you can check it out. It dates back to somewhere around 1375. The author's anonymous, but wrote several other things in the same style, like the Book of Privy Counseling. And these things were Christian mystical writings that circulated all over the place throughout Christian Europe. And they were not part of the official dogma. We're not talking, Aquinas here. We're not talking Augustine. This isn't stuff that the church said everybody should read this and it should be taken into account. This is stuff that people were passing around on the sly. And the book actually explicitly says, don't just hand this thing around. You're all going to get in trouble. Just find the handful of people. Hi, Geneva. Welcome to the call. Find the handful of people who are receptive to these ideas and pass the book on to them. And so the book never actually got burned, and its author never got found out or burned. We don't actually know who wrote it, but it makes the argument. The cloud of unknown. Geneva. We went back to paragraph 4 in chapter 9. We're looking at the opening sentence where he talks about a cloud of unknowing, and we read right past it. And this morning, as I was following up on references, I found out it's the title of a medieval mystical work. He put it in quotes for a reason. He's actually citing a mystical work in that Kennethian way. So in this work, the anonymous author is basically saying, what is the basis? How are you supposed to understand God? It's written like a guide from a teacher to a student. And the book argues you cannot use reason or intellect to understand God, that those are futile approaches. The only possible way to understand God is through love. And it says, by love may he be begotten and holden, but never through thought. And to achieve this goal, I'm citing Wikipedia now, God help me. The text recommends cultivation of two mental states. One is the cloud of forgetting, and the cloud of forgetting is where you set aside everything that you know, everything that you think, your powers of logic, just put it on a shelf for a moment. And then instead you cultivate a cloud of unknowing because God dwells beyond human understanding and can be comprehended only through love. Now, those of you who've studied Sufi mysticism may recognize that Sufism has an intense preoccupation with love and ecstatic states, like whirling dervishes or other techniques can be used by Sufis to attempt to defeat the conscious mind, the rationality, what Stephen's thinking of when Stephen criticizes ultra rationalists. Is the author of this and the Sufis agree that kind of hyper intellectual, I'm going to be at a distance and critique this according to the things that I've learned and logic my way through it is futile because human logic is inadequate to the task, say the Sufis and say the authors of The Cloud of Unknowing. It's inadequate to the task of understanding a being who's infinite. We're not infinite, we're finite. Our ability to reason is like child's play compared to God's ability to reason. And you're never going to catch up with the infinite by trying to, surround him with logical syllogisms and contain him, put him in a pen and say, there, I've defined God and now God has to obey me because I can predict him. And the Sufis just laugh at that and say, no, that's not what it means. To be a mortal being, in a cosmos that's created by an immortal, infinite being, is to be in a state of not exactly infantilization, but a state in which one must be suspicious of one's ego and one's attempts to capture and contain the infinite. So 1375 or so, this would be after a fair number of crusades, right? And the period of the crusades was a period when European Christianity came into contact for the first time in a richer, fuller way with Islam generally and Sufism specifically. And there was a lot of cross-pollination. Went both ways, a lot of cross-pollination. So I would not be surprised if The Cloud of Unknowing was written by somebody who either directly or indirectly had imbibed some Sufi writings or sayings. Um, Especially since the Sufis also have sayings about Jesus. So if you were a Christian mystic and you were frustrated with the sort of militancy and insistence on faith and obedience of the dominant empire, and you were looking for mystical alternatives, and you came into contact with the Sufi ideas about Jesus, you would be intrigued because here is a depiction that's closer to the Book of Q, the Book of Thomas, the preachings of Peter, some of Paul's references to the things that existed before Paul. This is the early Jesus. Is kind of you're getting a whiff of him there, and one thing leads to another. If Ari were on the call today, he'd be reminding us that in addition to the cross pollination between Christians and Muslims that are happening during and after the Crusades, there's also increased cross pollination with Judaism and these two groups, not just because of the state of affairs in Spain at the time, but also because once people start thinking it's okay to look for insights outside of the official approved sources, the official approved sources that tell you they are the only source, and you'll get in trouble if you look anywhere else. But once you resist that and you start looking around to other sources, it opens you up to, becoming more cosmopolitan. It's no coincidence that in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, this is when the Renaissance gets going. It's that cross-cultural contact really gets people excited. And this is a reference that's being made here in Kenneth's text when he's talking about the problems of fideism, the official Orthodox position that we are to know nothing. We are not to try to think our way we're supposed to obey. We're supposed to embrace faith. We're supposed to simply submit and trust that the people who tell us that they represent God do in fact represent God. They would never lie to us. Nobody would ever con us by pretending to represent God. No, we should just trust and be like little lambs waiting for the sheep to guide us. This is what he's criticizing in this chapter. He's talking about it's not that there's no value to it, but that in a world in which you are surrounded by con men, it's an extraordinarily dangerous thing to put your your spirituality and your understanding of nature, God, and man in the hands of people who don't necessarily have your best interests at heart. Michelle, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, two different things are on my mind at the moment, but you never know where I might go. I just might want to go on a tirade and a rant insulting Stephen Hickson for being an atheist and a barbarian for all his baby eating at my goodness, what's that famous Australian Outback, the Outback restaurant? Which funny, in the Outback in Australia, there are no Outback steakhouses because they wouldn't put out with that. That's like an insult to them. They don't go. I don't know. Anyway, what's on my mind is the one thing that you just said, Mr. Rick Marshall, about. Well, I forgot that, but anyway, I'll go. I don't know what your thoughts on this might be, Rick, but and anyone else in the group. But it was said sometimes people go around and they say, well, and I learned this in seminary. But that there may have been more, and this is just, it was logical to me to even think of it, that there was probably more than one rabbi during the time of Christ or Jesus's ministry that were by the name of Joshua, Anglican, or Yeshua. There's a lot of Yeshuas probably walking around Israel and those lands at that time. And guess what? They crucified a lot of guys, whether or not they were rabbis named Joshua. And they crucified a lot of rabbis named Joshua. And I don't know what they was putting in the water or what they was drinking back then. But a lot of them people's insane because, especially the rabbis, because they're going around believing in a goofy religion.
Well, one of the things that Ari reminds us is that the rabbinical period comes later. The period that Paul is writing in is the Second Temple period,
Right.
and it's after the Romans take out the temple and Jerusalem generally, and they create the mass exodus. They destroy the Second Temple way of life, and it leads to the development of the rabbinical tradition. So we would have in the time you're talking about there'd be a lot of Jewish thinkers, a
Yeah,
lot
and
of
I slipped up and said it was a goofy religion. Those weren't my words that I exactly intended and meant to use.
sure, sure.
It more of an interesting, and when I say goofy, I mean like there's like how many different laws? 602 at that time before Christ, you had to obey the law and the Torah perfectly. Otherwise, there was a whole series of ceremonial and sacramental things that you had to do to become ceremonially clean and holy again. And I'm
Right.
like, that's just way too much. No one can keep all that in their heads, which is why they had all this blood. So, like, they had all the blood sacrifices, and the bull sacrifices once a year. So, if you committed sins and you just couldn't keep track of them, that would cover you. But if you died before that and you had sins that were uncovered, you would probably go to Sheol.
Well, my understanding is Sheol was pretty much where everybody went in the Jewish religion.
No, Abraham's bosom.
Yeah, I thought they didn't separate heaven and hell the way that the Christians
They
do.
did. They did. When you get in the Talmud and the Tanakh, and the Zohar and what's that other piece of Jewish mystical writing? The Kabbalah. They talk about Sheol, which is the grave, and can be said to be a certain kind of place of sorrow, torment, which is the sorrow for the sins that you felt or committed in your life. And when you had finally repented, you were released to go to Abraham's bosom, where you were with your father Abraham and your forefathers and foremothers.
Sure. I clearly have more reading to do.
Yep.
Thanks, Michelle. So, cloud of unknowing. Part of what this whole chapter 9 is talking about is this difference between the mode of spirituality in which you are a conscious seeker who goes forth and tries to dilate your mind. You try to break up your assumptions. You question the things you take for granted, and you try to discover what the nature of God might be like. And that's the second tradition of the medieval period. But there's also this first tradition that is about obedience. We will tell you what to think. We need you to obey and comply. And if you don't do that, we'll burn you at a stake, or we'll stick a sword in you. And the medieval era is this tug of war between these two halves of the dialectic that defines the medieval period. So he's using the cloud of unknowing here in an interesting way, because on the one hand, he's using it as a literal take, as a reference to what it means to live according to faith, to say that you're just going to take your a prioris for granted. You're not going to question them. You're not going to try to shake them up. You're going to assume they're true and then think within the frame that they define. And he's using the term that way. But interestingly, the book that he's referencing, The Cloud of Unknowing, even though it does say you can't use your intellect to find your way to God, you have to use love. It's nevertheless part of that mystical, spiritual, countercultural tradition of the Middle Ages that's pushing back against the established hierarchy. It's written anonymously. It's being circulated quietly where people can't, get in trouble for having it. And it's proposing a version of Christianity that's different from the established one, i.e., it's essentially a kind of heresy. Uh, it's interesting that he would be using it this way. There was another piece I wanted to take us back to that was back in paragraph 1. The second sentence, I will just drop it in here, is a reference to Kierkegaard. And we talked about it at the time. Oh, okay. Well, I look forward to your return, Michelle. So we talked about it at the time, but not in the full context that I think Kenneth probably meant it. So this is back in paragraph 1, sentence 1 of chapter 9. A delusion is a state of mind in which we are least able to think of what we most need to think of. And I talked about delusions and ideologies when we did this sentence before. Kierkegaard's economical but vertiginous maxim fits very well the matrix of Christendom. That is, Christianity taken as a worldly, human, all too human reality. Well, you remember, part of what Ken is trying to do is he's trying to compress a lot of meaning into a small space. So he's constantly alluding to other writers and bringing them into the conversation. And one of the things that you can do is you can take a break and go read those other writers and come back to understand what the context is that Kenneth's got here. It's part of the way he's trying to overcome the problem of modern English. That in modern English, all the terms we need to have these discussions have been redefined in ways that exclude all the other perspectives. They all reinforce modernism. So even when we try to escape modernism, we recreate modernism, just a different version of it. So these references are ways to overcome the human language by pulling in whole books or bodies of work. The second reference here, Human All Too Human, is of course a reference to Nietzsche's book, Human All Too Human. There's just Kenneth read way too much Nietzsche for that to be an accidental turn of phrase. He's explicitly bringing in the criticisms that Nietzsche has for Christendom. And contrary to the popular impression of Nietzsche, it's not that he was against Jesus or Christian mysticism or spirituality. He was against the particular conformist, narrow-minded, institutionalized chumminess form of Christianity. Which, so for Nietzsche, it's the conflict between his father, who was more spiritual, and his mother, who was more conformist. And, that fed into Nietzsche's take on Christianity. He's caught in this tug of war. So for sure, this is being evoked. At the time we went through this sentence, that was my focus. It's like, yes, we talk about Kierkegaard and delusions, and we talk about Nietzsche and Human All Too Human. But I missed the part in the middle, didn't I? Because he says it fits very well the matrix of Christendom, and then he italicizes Christendom, just in case we missed the point. Christendom, get it? Christendom? And what he means by Christendom is he just named Kierkegaard. If you name Kierkegaard and Christendom in the same sentence, then you have to be referring to Kierkegaard's attack upon Christendom, which I'll put here in the chat. Attack upon Christendom. Kierkegaard's attack upon Christendom was the last big thing he wrote in his life. And in the intro to Attack Upon Christendom, Kierkegaard, who has been recognized as a theologian and a deeply Christian scholar, through the body of work that he put together by that point, Kierkegaard basically says, I'm writing this now because a theologian just died who everybody has praised throughout my life. And I swore to myself I would not write this book until that guy died and my father died. And after they both died, I could set about writing this. And then Kierkegaard says, every other thing I have ever written was written in preparation for writing this. I wrote them knowing I was going to write this and that I was going to wait to write this until I was ready to do it. And so he said, basically, he's saying my philosophy cannot be understood unless you understand that it was all driving to this point. Now, the main translator, Lowry, in 1944, in his intro to Attack Upon Christendom, Lowry's a priest, and says he wasn't particularly happy to be the one handed the job of translating Attack Upon Christendom, but he's not opposed to it. He's decided to not take a pro or con stance toward Kierkegaard's book, but it's discomforting to be writing it. And Lowry says, of course, we have to treat this last work as being separate from Kierkegaard's body of work, just like his very first work was separate. And only the things in between, are really the true Kierkegaard. And of course, that's a direct contradiction of what Kierkegaard himself says in the text that Lowry translated, where Kierkegaard says, no, this is the most important part. This is what my whole philosophy has been about, is getting us to this point. And since this is sentence 2 in the opening paragraph of this chapter, we really have to understand everything that Kenneth is saying in this chapter through the lens of Kierkegaard's critique of the difference between personal Christian spirituality, which could be authentic and be trying to recreate the teachings of Jesus, and the kingdom of God in the way that mystics have always believed that Jesus meant. Or it can be taken in the sense of this is this large institution that we all go to when we pay our tithes, and it does what it does and we all obey and we try not to think too much. And he says, the former he would take as authentic Christianity, but the latter he takes as a perversion and a betrayal of Christianity. He says the latter is so conventional and so politically minded and socially minded that it could be an example of the very kind of institution that if Jesus were to return would nail him up on a cross again, or do the equivalent in the modern world, stick him in jail, anything to get him to stop talking, because he says the kinds of things that that the people who claim to speak in his name would not be happy about. So the typical theologian, modern theologian's take is that Kierkegaard went off the rails, like Stephen's asking about in the chat. But Kierkegaard's take is these are the rails. My whole life has been the rails aiming towards this book, and now I can write this book. And this book is a deeply philosophical, deeply Christian critique of the Christian religion as containing two completely alien elements, something that is true to Jesus and something that is an utter betrayal of Jesus. And that the thing that is an utter betrayal of Jesus claims to speak for Jesus. It's intriguing. And in this way, it's not entirely unlike what Nietzsche talks about in his criticisms of Christianity, where again, he goes back and forth between the figure of his father, who's the mystical spiritual Christian, and the figure of his mother, who's a social, political, conforming Christian. And this conflict of the tug of war between the two, in a way, represents the tug of war that defined the entire Middle Ages, the 1,000-year period, where on the one hand you had all this power tied up in this religious empire that wanted everybody to obey and conform, and on the other hand, the words of Jesus kept inspiring all these nuns and monks and mystics and hermits to go running off into the wilderness and commune directly with God and come back with these messages about the brotherhood of man and humility and and taking care of one another and other things that really annoyed the religious empire. So this tug of war is captured right in these opening sentences of chapter 9, and it carries through into paragraph 5. This is I think what I missed when I was walking you guys through this before is that this really has to be kept in mind as the defining interpretive frame that Kenneth has in mind for everything that he's writing that follows. That tug of war, that dialectic. Um, and so when we talk about faith understood as a vice, one of the things he's getting into in paragraphs 5 and 6 and 7 is the ways in which, from Kenneth's perspective and the perspective of these other writers that Kenneth is alluding to, faith and spirituality are opposites. And they're in direct conflict. And this is an idea that's alien in the modern world, where faith equals spirituality. That's what spirituality is. And if you try to say it's something else, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people get very angry with you because they've pitched their entire plan for salvation around the equation of faith and spirituality. The idea that they might not be equal but might be opposites is extremely distressing to large numbers of people. But that's the framework that Kenneth is operating on in this chapter. So with that in mind, let's go through paragraph 5 and catch up again to where we left off so that we can go forward from there. But read it with those kind of with Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and the dialectic between faith and spirituality in mind. He opens, what are the implications of founding a religion on a cult of faith or fideism? Without knowing or having to inform oneself, one assures oneself that one already knows all that is essential. Christian fideism is the degradation of Platonic a priorism into irrationalism, the evolutionarily or rationally retrograde collapse of philosophical culture into dogmatism. And then in sentence 3, which is where we left off last time, it embraces as if it were the most complete virtue, the vice of somnambulism, going through life in a dream state. So let's see, I know a couple people have joined, including Geneva, since we pasted the link. Why don't I put the link in there so you can find the text? What am I doing? I'm taking you through text and I didn't even give you the link. I suck so bad. And I'm going to drop these 3 sentences again in there again because we're gonna pull these apart in preparation for going forward with the rest of paragraph 5. There's goodies in here that become apparent when you're thinking about the Kierkegaard-Nietzsche dialectical framework that aren't visible if we don't have those in mind. So in the sentence 2, he says, one assures oneself that one already knows all that is essential, right? I'm sure Donald is way ahead of me on this. When Kenneth and essential, what is essential to things? Kenneth would agree with Stephen that moderns throw the word essential around like it means nothing, like it's just flavor language, like it's candy. But Kenneth never does that. He will never use the word essential the way that a modern would. He will there is always Aristotle here, right? Kenneth has been immersed in Aristotle, and Aristotle will not shut up about distinguishing what is merely incidental from what is essential. So the reference to, assuring oneself that one already knows all that is essential, this is a reference to Aristotle's assessment of what is the nature of understanding and learning. And Aristotle wants us to stop being distracted by the things that don't matter and focus on the things that do. And for him, what makes something essential is, yeah, exactly. People use it as a filler word. And for Aristotle, it's the opposite of a filler word. It's among the most important words, maybe the second or third most important word after sophrosune and I don't know, katafusine. It's hard to say what is top, but it's in his top five. Essential is a loaded term for Aristotle, which makes it a loaded term for Kenneth. What is essential is defined by one's ethos, by one's character. Remember, we're working off this ancient Greek Heraclitean framework that all things inhabit two worlds. They inhabit two natures. There is the infinite nature around them of all the things, the laws of nature that you can see and experiment with and measure and try to figure out, which is hard enough, right? I mean, without science, it's so easy to go off the rails and be superstitious about it, or parochial about it, or ideological about it. But as Heraclitus says, there's also the nature within us, and it's equally big, it's equally infinite. You can spend the whole life trying to figure out what makes yourself tick and still not get to the bottom of it. And half the reason why is as time passes and we try to understand ourselves through the passage of time, our character grows and changes. It's an organism. To the Greeks, nothing is an object or a thing, not even an insubstantial thing. To the Greeks, everything is an organism. And to be an organism means that it is growing and changing. Your own nature is growing and changing. And part of the reason it's growing and changing is nature contains within it principles and rules and laws and lawfulness that dictate its own change over time. The acorn is trying to become the oak. And as Stephen points out, most acorns fall on ground where it's not that their effort isn't going to help them. Right? They're on stony ground, or it's too dry, or it's too wet, or they're eaten by hogs, whatever. But they all are trying. It is the character of the acorn to try to become the oak. And if that means that those few acorns that get the right conditions seize that opportunity and do not miss it, and they transform. And as they transform from an oak into a sprout, into a sapling, into a young tree, into a mighty huge old tree, the nature of the plant is changing. And part of the change comes from adapting to the circumstances around it, the nature around it. But part of the change comes from its own inner laws of development, its teleology. It doesn't have a brain, but it has a kind of an existential yearning to become something else. That's why the Greeks say we only become what we already are. Why they say we are the fruits of our former selves and we are the seeds of our future selves. We're all in a process of aliosis, of othering, of becoming something else. And that's core to our essence. To know the essence of a thing, to know its ethos, its character, is to understand why it is the way that it is now, but also to understand what it is trying to become. Whether it succeeds or not is only partly up to it. It's partly up to circumstance, right? Gnome and Tuche says Thucydides. We're caught in a dialectic between what it is that our character wills versus what do circumstances permit. We're navigating this complicated relationship. But Kenneth is never going to throw a term like this, like essential, into a sentence like this, unless he's evoking that entire framework of the double nature of things, the outer and the inner, and that the inner nature is the ethos or character, and the qualities of that ethos are the most essential properties for understanding what that thing is and what it's going to become. Until you know what those essential properties are, you have basically no chance of predicting anything meaningful about that thing. You don't really understand it. You might, as Hegel says, be familiar with it, but that very familiarization is now blocking you from understanding it because you're taking it for granted when you should be treating it as the deep subject, the complex subject, full of energies and powers and transformations that it actually is. All of that is Aristotelianism. Geneva, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Um, I wished I could better frame it, but I'm just wondering um, if there's some belief that you said that there were two natures, like the spiritual nature and then the person's nature. And I'm just wondering if these two natures aren't in some way connected. Like the nature of the person comes from that larger nature that there is, or it provides the nature of the person. And is that what a person seeks, is how to become one again with that spiritual nature that is over all? I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm trying to
Makes perfect
make
sense.
make sense in my brain with this because I understand what I mean. I'm just not sure I'm able to express it very well.
I hear you,
But
right?
okay, yeah,
Yeah, you're right on. And what you're saying is a very Aristotelian thing to say and a very Heraclitean, very Greek thing to say. That the nature within us, it's not an accident that there's a nature within us. It's because
mm,
nature makes if in the Greek concept of the cosmos in which there are no things, only organisms, every organism is creating and reproducing as well as transforming. It's relating to the world around it and it's making new things. And nature as a whole is incredibly productive. I mean, you just look around you, look out the window, look at all the things growing. Nobody, it's constantly producing. And so the way that nature produces is to not just make things, even though I just used the word, God bless it, modern English, but to make organisms, organisms within organisms within organisms within organisms. And to be an organism is both to have an obvious nature and a relationship to the nature around you, and also to have a subtle nature within you that takes over half of the work of your growth and change and direction, right? Your ethos is doing half the work. So it's and to the Greeks, this relationship is it's not only between us and the larger nature, even nature itself has an ethos. Even nature itself has an ethos. I can't remember who it was that said this, if it was Thales or somebody else. He said, physis is to cosmos as psyche is to somos. I've quoted this one before, but it's so juicy you can chew on it forever. So whenever Heraclitus talks about nature, he calls it physis, and that's because he's focused on a particular aspect of nature. But the usual term for nature is cosmos. That's their word for the universe. They would never just say universe. They say cosmos. And to the Greeks, cosmos is the opposite of chaos. That chaos isn't about orderliness per se. Um, Chaos is about the inability to remain coherent, to be so riven by self-conflicts that you fling to pieces. To use Stephen's early terminology, centripetal versus centrifugal. A chaos is centrifugal; it flings itself to pieces. But a cosmos is centripetal; it pulls itself together. So every organism is a cosmos. This is one of the things that the Greeks are most concerned about, is to be an organism means that you are autonomous, you are autologous, you are oh, I'm forgetting the other term, autark, you have autarkia. And together, what these things mean is that you are self-governing to an extent. Even though you are part of a larger whole and you're dependent on fortune 2K and the larger whole, somebody step on you, oh well, that was sucks to be you. But other than circumstances, can you master yourself enough to be coherent and to have a life and a direction? And to do that, you have to be that's what it is to be a cosmos. And and conversely, Greek has this interesting grammar where you can invert things. So in the same way that to be an organism is to be a cosmos, in the same way they're saying the cosmos is an organism. Cosmos and organism can almost be equated. with each other. Whereas a chaos is everything that we call law and order and everything we call chaos in the modern world. It's just a collection of stuff. And whether it's mechanically assembled like a machine or whether it's fallen to pieces in a junkyard, it doesn't matter. Both of those are chaos to the Greeks because the toaster never created itself and it can't heal itself or rebuild itself. And it doesn't generate other new little toasters that also have the ability to make themselves. A cat is a cosmos, but a toaster is a chaos. It's a mechanism that simulates a cosmos right up until the very first time it takes a hit, and then it begins falling to pieces. Whereas the cat can heal, the toaster can't. The toaster is not a cosmos. So they saw the entire cosmos as being a kind of organism. And as an organism, all organisms have the quality that within them is an ethos. Within every cosmos, and I really ought to just write this down. So I don't know if I've ever written it down before. Within every cosmos is an ethos. And the ethos is the inner nature by which the cosmos rules itself. So in a cell, a big part of the ethos comes from the DNA, right? The DNA is not complete. I mean, as we're learning, there's more going on in a cell than the DNA. But in a way, the DNA is sort of dictating to the rest of the cell what kinds of RNA are you going to produce? What kinds of proteins are you going to produce? In what ratios are you going to produce them? How are they going to relate to each other? And all those things shape the cell, and that shape of the cell determines how the cell relates to the world around it. There's an ethos within it. And so phusis, according to the Greeks, is the ethos of the cosmos. Phusis is the character of nature. It's the laws of nature within it. It's the principles and archai that drive nature to behave the way that it does. Nature has a soul. It has a character. And whether it's Thales or somebody else, and I'll have to look it up again, whichever Greek it was that said phusis is the cosmos as psyche is the somos, is saying that your somos likewise is a kind of a cosmos, right? All these, as we're learning in modern anatomy and physiology, all these ingenious systems working together to keep your blood pressure within healthy limits, your blood fats within healthy limits, your blood sugars within healthy limits, your temperature within healthy limits. Everything is working with these dialectical systems. Now it's too much, and so we push the other way. Now it's too little, and so we push back where we started. There's these constantly shifting systems designed to create a whole that can take a beating, like this little shiny scar right here from where a dog bit me in fifth grade and took a chunk out of my arm. I could see my bone. It went all the way down. But my body was able to fill that back in with scar tissue and heal me. I didn't have to bleed to death and die because I'm not a toaster. I'm a cosmos. My body's a cosmos. And the reason that my body is able to heal itself is because my body has a ethos, a nature that dictates its teleology. How will my body respond to the insults and opportunities that are inflicted upon it by the world around it? And if there are no insults or opportunities in particular, how am I going to transform over time, like growing up from a fifth grader into an adult? These rules, these laws of aliosis and mutation, mutatis mutandis, transformation, the river that you can't step in twice because it's always changing. All of this is core to the concept of the body in the same way that it's core to the concept of the universe as a whole, the cosmos. And just as the ethos of the cosmos is phusis, so the ethos of the body is your psyche or soul. Where your soul to the Greeks is not some free-floating energy or ghost that has temporarily inhabited a meat spacesuit and then will fly away to the afterlife. The Greeks didn't believe any of that. The Greeks believed your body is you. That is you. The soul's not you. The soul is a song that your body is singing as long as your body's healthy enough to keep singing it. And when your body gets too sick to sing the song of your soul, you breathe your last and now you're dead. You didn't go anywhere else. You're a dead person. That's who you are. You're that body lying there. That's the real you. It's like when I stop singing a song, I don't cease to exist in my body, and the song goes and lives in heaven, and that's where I am. This is the Greek concept of these things. Natures, nested natures, and the ethos within creating the capacity for the organism to be a whole and for it to dictate how does it navigate the larger world around it. So all these relationships, the self to others, life and death, all of this is being mediated by the ethos, the nature within. And to the Greeks, it was patently obvious that you can't have a cosmos without an ethos. The ethos is the collection of rules and teleologies and drives that make the cosmos hold itself together. And if nothing holds it together, then it's an ethos, then it's a chaos. It just falls to pieces. We see that all the time. Every time an animal dies, it falls to pieces. It can't preserve itself. Its ethos is no longer up to the job of maintaining its autarkia. And so it ceases to be an organism. You can just see it with your own eyes. It's just obviously true. Now, in our modern artificial world where we're so insulated and people don't know where milk comes from or where beef comes from, you could go your whole life and not see very much of these relentlessly common examples in nature that prove to us this thing that the Greeks took for granted. That every cosmos has an ethos. It has to. It wouldn't be a cosmos, otherwise it'd be a chaos. It is the ethos that makes it a cosmos. Cosmos without an ethos is a chaos. There's all kinds of interesting little philosophical equations we can make here to summarize this Greek stuff. So anyway, this is what essentialism is about. All of this is on point. When he says, without knowing or having to inform oneself, one assures oneself that one already knows all that is essential. By essential, Kenneth means all of this stuff that Aristotle's talking about. That you don't know something until you know its character. Right? Until you know its character, you don't know what it will do and you don't know what it's becoming. And if you don't know what it's becoming, you probably don't know what it used to be either or why it became what it is now. All these processes, you don't know the story of the thing, both the past story that has already occurred and the future story that will occur in the future, but that we can only guess at because it hasn't happened yet. All of that's tied up with ethos. That's what it means to understand. And Aristotle's point is this is the hardest thing. This is the hardest thing to keep all of this in mind when you study something and not to devolve into treating it like an object, not to devolve into treating other people like they're just NPCs, non-player characters, that you're the hero and everybody else is just there to support you. That delusion, that parochial, egotistical delusion is what comes naturally to people unless they have cultivated within themselves the capacity to understand that the universe wasn't created for us, by us, about us. We're participants. We're not the star. And that means that whatever we think about other things or ourselves is just some variety of guessing. That there is a more important truth inside everything, its character, that is essential to understanding the thing itself. And that the art of holding all those egotisms and parochialisms and ideologies at bay long enough to really look at a thing. And as Plato has Socrates say, to do justice to the rights of the question, what really is its character? This is the hardest thing people can do. And that's why Kenneth writes this sentence the way he does. Fideism starts out with the assumption that you have a right to know, and not a right to find out, but a right to simply declare that whatever you assume is true. A priori, the thing you thought before you ever investigated, you can just defend it as the truth. And that you don't have to discipline yourself and struggle to try to understand what's essential. You don't just get to know. Yeah, cosmos is a balance between the centrifugal and the centripetal. It's got to take both into account. It's a dialectic. Yeah, exactly. So when he writes this opening sentence, when he writes this opening half of sentence 2 of paragraph 5, the point that he's making is from a classical Greek perspective, there's nothing as bizarre as fideism because fideism takes for granted as true what the classical people took for granted as false, right? Whatever's in our head is not the same as the truth. The truth has to be searched for. What Heraclitus says, nature loves to hide. It is hard to figure this stuff out. Fusis cryptistai philae, says Heraclitus. And nature includes ethos, the character, the essential parts of understanding something. That stuff hides from us. And we have to be diligent searchers, and we have to discipline ourselves to have any chance to try to understand even a little bit of what is essential. We certainly are never going to understand all that is essential, and we definitely aren't if we start from a position that we already do know all that is essential, because then we won't be willing to put in the work. Will seem absurd to us. Why should I discipline myself when I already have all the answers? Yeah, one-dimensional thinking and zero-dimensional thinking. Yes, all of this is tied up with this. Exactly. So, so my apologies when I took you guys through sentence two the first time. I skipped over the most important part, and the most important part is Aristotle and ethos, and what does it mean to know? What is essential? Because that's where all the bite is in the sense. Kenneth almost never, I mean, he will in emails, he'll write jokes and he'll write casual stuff and occasional, here's something that happened that was funny. But when he's crafting his text for a book or for a column like he did with End Times here, he's he works hard on this language. He edits, and a lot of it isn't even in the editing. A lot of it comes up front in the prep, in the pulling together of the various quotes and references, most of which he then discards afterwards. And you either catch them or you don't. So this has got Aristotle all over it, and Aristotle would have a lot to say about people just assuming that they're right because it feels good, because they've decided that faith equals spirituality. For Aristotle, faith is the opposite of spirituality. And as it is for Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. All right, so that's the first half of sentence two. Let's do the second half. Christian fideism is the degradation of Platonic a priorism into irrationalism. Now, last time we talked about this problem of rationality and irrationality, right? Kenneth is being hoist on his petard. He's trying to use modern English to say something that modern English is absolutely incompetent to say, which is the distinction between Begriff, Verstand, and Vernunft. Does rationalism refer to Vernunft, the mature adult form of the human mind, or does it refer merely to Verstand, the intellectualism, the mathematics, the logic, the formalism, what we have been trained to think in an abstract way? In English, rational could mean either one, and people flip back and forth between them without even realizing half the time there even is a distinction. Kenneth knows full well there's a distinction, but when he slips into using the English, sometimes you have to fix in your mind what he's saying. So you have to know that he's not saying that it would be bad not to be engaged in Verstand. If he thinks it's bad to be engaged in Verstand, he sees the problems of Verstand. He sees the limits. So that's not what he means by this sentence. He means that you've fallen from Vernunft, from the full dialectical model in which you're using gnosis and noesis, not just noesis. He's not talking about into anti-intellectualism. He's using the word rational to mean, that you're embracing both the experiential, concrete, immersive faculty of the mind and the abstract, systematizing mode of the mind. And if that dialectic breaks apart, and you just fall back into one of the two half-witted modes that we have to grow through on our way to Vernunft, then that's what he's criticizing here. That's the degradation. And in that, he's saying something important about Plato that Donald would like. And I need to, emphasize it for everybody else because, Donald is Plato's champion who says that Kenneth kicks Plato around a little more often than he should. And this is one of the cases where Kenneth is actually not doing it. Kenneth is actually saying, no, you have to understand Plato's an Aristos. He's not a doulos who would be stuck in Begriff. And he's not a Banausos who would be stuck in Verstand. He's an Aristos, which means he's using Vernunft. If Plato is working on a prioris, it's not because Plato believes that everything can be explained through intellectualism, which is the criticism that is often unfairly lobbed at Plato, occasionally by Kenneth, and that Donald doesn't care for. So, he's in this case actually saying the opposite. He's saying Yes, Plato is trying through his work to teach us how to discipline our intellectualism, how to put a leash on it. How do you intellectualize in a responsible manner so that you don't slip into becoming a mere abstractivist? He's trying. That's why part of why he keeps bringing Socrates in, saying you have to do justice to the rights of the question. He's like that it's not enough to just ideologically frame a topic. You have to actually do justice to all the essential parts of that topic. The existential truth of the topic, independent of your ideology, has to be accounted for, and the insistence that that be taken into account, the irrationalisms, the emotionalisms, the subjectivisms, that is Vernunft. It is Vernunft that combines the rational and the irrational into this higher mode of thought. And effectively, quietly, slyly, not fully admitting it, but for Donald's benefit, I'm going to spell it out. He's praising Plato here and saying, yeah, Plato is able to work with a prioris and a priori thinking without entirely falling prey to Verstand and mere noesis. But the problem is, once you slip into this faith equals spirituality mode, now you're saying now you are saying that your ideology or your dogma is more important than reality. You're suppressing the importance of gnosis and you're raising the importance of noesis. And in doing that, it's a backsliding. I'll call on you. Please remember what you're going to say, Stephen, because I don't want to lose it. I know it's going to be good. He's this is a point that I missed last time too. He calls it degradation. And then he says the evolutionarily or rationally retrograde collapse of philosophical culture into dogmatism. Sharon asked me about this last week, and I didn't give a full enough answer. And I saw this morning what it was that I was missing. What's essential in this is a Hegelian Greek idea that we are born as infants in a state of radical naive gnosis. We are immersed in our sensations. Every pain is the worst pain we've ever felt. Every hunger is the greatest hunger ever felt. And the reason is we never were hungry before in our entire life. This is the one and only example we've got. It's as big as it gets. The infant is entirely turned up to 11. Everything is at maximum volume. And because everything's at maximum volume, everything about the child is experiential. There's no room left over in the brain to leave room for stepping back, abstracting, distancing yourself from the experience, considering the pattern. Have I been hungry before? Does that mean I will be hungry again? I wonder if there's something I could do to make sure next time I eat before I get that hungry. Maybe I don't have to be this hungry. I mean, all this kind of planning and thinking and pattern matching, this is noesis. This is not gnosis. This is Verstand, not Begriff. So it is, according to Hegel and the Greeks, the natural course of development of a Homo sapiens is to begin in this raw immediacy and gradually grow dissatisfied with it. And as Hegel says, begin to push off against it, to negate it, to develop some distance from it, so that your experience of feelings and sensations and memories and appetites is no longer the whole person, but it's reduced to just being a part of you. And there's part of you that's been set aside to think and to plan and to ponder about the future. What does this mean? What could I, what could, I wonder if there are explanations for this. I wonder if I can use those explanations to make my life go better. And that's only the second stage. So Hegel and the Greeks say, if you stop at that point, you've actually just moved into a second half-witted state in which you tend to over intellectualize, over abstract, rely too much on your training, too much on your ideologies and dogmatisms. And now you reason your way in these broad sweeping generalizations that are completely detached from reality, because at least the live wire experience of being an infant kept you tethered to what was real. It was parochial as hell, but it was real. You really were hungry. You really did stub your toe. That butterfly really did land on the flower, and that really was the most amazing thing you had ever seen. Those were all tethering to reality. But when we move into the realm of all Jews are like this, all black people are like this, all white people are like that, E equals MC squared, we're now in a realm where we're disconnected from reality. And we can apply these broad sweeping generalizations without ever having to stub our toes over the ugly facts of reality, where actually each Jewish person is a separate person. Each white person is a separate white person. Each black person is a separate black person. Yes, they have some things in common, but they have so many differences. And Begriff requires that we not ignore those differences because they're right there in front of us to be sensed and felt and responded to. But Verstand wants you to sit alone in an office somewhere and not have to actually look at any of the messy details. And now you can just make little equations and say, I think I'll purify my state by eliminating all the impure people. These are the sorts of things that Verstand does. And it's why Hegel and the Greeks say, you have to get out of that second stage into a third stage, because in the third stage, having developed the powers of Verstand, you must now become dissatisfied with it when you notice how easily it lends itself to horrors and holocausts, right? Broad sweeping generalizations feel mighty and powerful, but that's the problem. It means every stupid thing you have is magnified through all that power, and now they become stupidities inflicted upon the entire world, as in World War II. So it is by reconnecting with our infantile Begriff, reconnecting with sensation and feeling and irrationalism and subjectivism, and weaving it together with the abstraction and intellectualism and education, that we finally become whole-minded people. And when he says evolutionarily or rationally retrograde, when he says degradation, that's three times, and he said retrograde, that's and collapse. That's 5 words he's using in the second half of the sentence to all imply the same thing. He's saying, according to our nature, we have a path of development we're supposed to go through. Just like a baby grows up to be an adult, so a baby mind is supposed to grow up to be an adult mind. But when people equate spirituality and faith and start demanding that the things they take for granted must be true because they said so, because that's my faith. When they do that, they're reversing the stages of mental development and shoving themselves further away from the heuristic heights of Vernunft, back down into the two half-witted strategies of, on the one hand, the ideological mind of Verstand, or then even further down into the emotive experiential mind of Begriff. And in this, it is as though an adult human being began shrinking again and became a baby. It is not the direction that Homo sapiens was evolved to develop in. It is here's a word that means nothing in biology and evolution, but that's really popular in fantasy literature. You'll find in Robert E. Howard's writings about Conan the Barbarian, devolve. And the group from the 1980s, Devo, used to run with this as a pun. That he's basically implying that to reverse directions from the nuanced, sophisticated approach to rationalism that an Aristos like Plato is taking, and to shift down from that back into faith as the answer to all questions, is a kind of devolution of the human mind back down into one of its unstable half-witted states. And of course, the reason he talked about essential up above with Aristotle is arete. What is the arete that makes us great and able to survive? What makes us viable as a species? Well, if cheetahs suddenly decided running is for losers and they're just going to saunter around at their leisure, they'll go extinct. Their whole species depends on the arete of that speed. This is what makes them a viable species. And he's evoked Aristotle here to say, I can't believe I've read this so many times. I've read this for 20 years, and it wasn't until this morning that I put it together. He's quoting Aristotle and devolution together to bring up the concept of arete. He's saying the arete of Homo sapiens is our ability to acculturate and develop this heuristic mind, this Vernunft mind that can hold both of its faculties in balance with each other. And to intentionally undo that and devolve yourself back into a state of faith is to put in danger the entire species. If you spread that ideology around, the entire species gets into some serious trouble, because it is only through the dialectic between Begriff and Vernunft that we have any chance of getting to the truth of what is essential and how things actually work. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting so long, Stephen. Come off mute and tell us what you had on your mind.
Yeah, we'll see. The question of what we mean by rationalism, and I spent a bit of time on it. what is rational thought. Or, for example, we create laws of physics. That's rational thought. And we can demonstrate the laws of physics are a truth. Obviously, the physics of a motor engine are going to be the same in Beijing as in America. You're dealing with a whole load of things, or otherwise you're not going to be able to make an effective car engine, are you? This can be demonstrated. The teacher, for example, mathematical principles. The teacher, would show you with the old magnetic board and the rods. Somehow, objectively, you can demonstrate that measurement you have in your head is valid. We understand that. And that is a type of rational thought. But special rationalism goes into another world, and that's the world of ideas. Can we demonstrate that an idea has a value? If I come up with, say, the moral theory that eating babies is bad, where's the demonstrable truth? This is what special rationalism is dealing with. With ordinary rationalism, we're looking at the physical world, we're working out laws and rules as to what is going on. That world is objective. We can demonstrate it, unless we're all living in a dream, or we're a brain in a vat and we're being fooled. But special rationalism is to try and develop a set of rules concerning ideas. Ideas are things that you cannot demonstrate objectively. And special rationalism's job basically is it takes ideas and says that's a valid principle and that's an invalid principle. But it's not something you can demonstrate objectively because all this philosophy, we're floating in the air a bit. If we've gone the way of that mad French philosopher, I forget his name again. You look at what he was saying, he was just cantilevering ideas. I've established this book. I put it on the side of the desk. Look at this. I can put another thought on top of that and another thought. And eventually you reach a point where the whole thing's going to collapse. And this seems to be a bit with the postmodernists, which is why so far I haven't had time to delve into the postmodernists. I'm not sure it's worth it. There's so much other stuff I'd have to cover. But you see how on one hand you have physics and on the other hand, idealism. Special rationalism is something that's sitting in between that. Special rationalism is dealing with subjectives as if they're objectives, because we can't demonstrate those subjectives the same way a teacher can grab the magnetic board and demonstrate mathematics. Mathematics, what's that? That's just some sort of ethereal idea, where is it? But I can make an objective case for it. So you get this point that with special rationalism and idealism, you're sort of stuck with a subjective case. But you can't readily demonstrate a subjective idea. You, as a subjective being, has to agree with that subjective. I can't demonstrate it objectively. Well, certainly not easily. Rick, so does that all make sense? The space between idealism and physics. Rationalism is trying to treat ideas as if they're objective objects. So, but not all ideas are valid. Some are ideas metaphysics. That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. No, this is a really important area you're exploring here. You're right. This is where it all gets complicated, and it goes to the heart of what this entire section on medieval civilization is about. What is the relationship of the subjective to the objective? What is the relationship of the spirit to the body and to the nature at large? These are the big moving questions. And as you point out, it gets fuzzy very fast. It is so easy to mistake the land of theory for the land of reality. And many people live their whole lives in the land of theory, in which everything operates the way that theory says it should. I remember an age. I went through that stage when I was, in my late teens, early 20s. I was all about the land of theory. I thought I had it all figured out as a typical adolescent. But it took a while, and it was very painful to come to understand how desperately wrong intelligence can take you. It was even more painful to discover the more intelligent you are, the more wrong you can go, right? The dumb person can only get so far from reality, which is an enormous blessing because it keeps them close to reality. Their errors are obvious errors, but a really smart person can dig themselves a gigantic, compelling labyrinth that only somebody smarter than they are could find the way out of.
Well, that's the point of idiocracy.
Yeah.
He thought the time machine was a literal concept, and his dumb friends says, of course, the time machine is an amusement ride. How could you believe there's an actual time machine?
Right. Yeah. And this all gets more complicated when we start to talk about going to what Geneva was asking about before. It plays right into what you're talking about. What is the nature of that nature within us? I mean, why is that there? Why does nature keep doing this, creating things like this? And is that inner nature as real as the outer nature? And this is where it gets ultra complex. But I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can. I'm going to, in conveying the Greek Hegelian, Arendtian, Kierkegaardian, Nietzschean, Smithian take on this, I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I can. But it points to a lot of very difficult issues, even though I think we can say it simply. They would say the nature around us is obviously real. It may not be what we think it is, but it has obviously an actuality of its own, a lawfulness of its own. And one of the ways we know that is it keeps surprising us, right? I mean, it doesn't obey our ideas about it. We get so far in trying to model and map it, and the next thing we know, it does something completely unexpected. And eventually we figure out that the unexpected thing wasn't a violation of the laws of nature. It was an expression of the laws of nature. We just didn't fully understand what the laws of nature were. And where our error was, we put ourselves out of harmony with the actual laws of nature, and thus we were surprised. This is what it means to be actual and real. They would say that the nature within us, the ethos, is every bit as objective and real as the nature around us. But it's much harder to measure. It is much harder to figure out how that reality works. And when you think about all the mistakes we make in trying to figure out the nature around us, and you contemplate the idea that the nature within us is every bit as lawful and maybe even more important since it governs everything we do ever, and yet vastly harder to figure out, you realize that this self-knowledge is the realm in which we're going to founder the most. We're gonna blow it. We're gonna have gigantic mismatches between who we think we are and who we actually are, because who we actually are is every bit as lawful, as driven by laws of nature as an apple falling from a tree. But the difference is we can see the apple fall from the tree and generalize to the law of nature, but we can't see whatever happened in here that made the acorn decide to become an oak. It's not visible to us. And that's an enormous problem. So people normally think of this as the objective realm and this as the subjective realm. But the Greeks would say they're both the objective realm. And they're not to be confused with the realm of ideas, which Stephen is talking about, which is the genuine, well, I would say the realm of feelings and experiences on the one hand, and the realm of ideas on the other. These twin realms make up the subjective realm. How we feel about things and how we think about things is subjective. But how things actually are, including our own inner nature, is objective. And as Stephen implied, the problem is we consider it an enormous victory to have gotten out of the realm of feelings and appetites and experiences and into the realm of ideas without realizing we're still in a subjective realm. Now we're in the realm of math and logic and ideology, which is every bit as subjective as the realm of feelings and appetites and so on. That is to say, it is not binding upon reality. I mean, if I throw an apple at my brother and I hit him in the head, that really happened, right? That's the realm of reality. These are objective things. But if I imagine doing it, it didn't happen. It was not binding upon reality. He's not angry at me because I thought about hitting him in the head with the apple. Now, if I tell him I thought about hitting him in the head with an apple, then he might be angry with me, but the words left my mouth and became part of the objective reality around me, right? So, what is objective and what is subjective? People who move from the realm of feelings into the realm of ideas, especially if it takes the form of logic or math or theories, they tell themselves that now they're no longer subjective. Now they're objective. They're objective thinkers. And they hold the subjective thinkers in contempt. And in this, they're failing to understand that they too are subjective. It's just a different flavor of subjectivity. Heraclitus talks about the experiential side of subjectivity as moist. He calls them moist or damp souls. He says damp souls are heavy, right? But if you extract yourself out of the immediacy of your feelings and experiences and start to work in the realm of theories, he says now you're moving towards a dry soul. And this is his way of trying to talk about the concrete versus the abstract, the emotionally cloying and gripping versus the at a distance considerable but also disposable, which is where that's the sweet spot for an intellectual. I don't want to feel like it's binding upon me. I want to feel like I can think about it without being trapped by it, as opposed to shooting up with heroin, which grabs you. It's like the whole point of it grabs you, right? You're not free to look at it from a distance. So these things, these twin sides, you can see why an intellectual thinks that he's become objective because it feels so different. But he's still subjective. He's just now in the land of ideas, which Stephen was talking about, instead of being in the land of feelings. But neither one of them is the land of objective truth. It's not that we don't have ideas, and it's not that we don't have feelings. Those are real things that are happening. They are epiphenomena produced by our inner nature. But the inner nature itself, and this is the thing moderns have a really hard time understanding, and modern English gives us nothing in the way of vocabulary or concepts to gather this point. But in Greek and German, it was easy to say. Our character or our ethos is objective. Objective but hidden. It's in us, but it's real and it's binding and authoritative. And it's there because laws of nature have put it in us. And now that it's in us, it has its own laws of nature that are binding upon us and that push us, whether we like it or not, whether we feel like it or not, whether we agree with it conceptually or logically or not, it's still binding upon us. I have the alcoholic gene, even though I've never taken a sip, so much as a sip of alcohol as an adult. Nevertheless, I will be an alcoholic until the day I die, regardless of whether I feel like one, and regardless of whether I come up with a fascinating argument to try to explain how I'm not. Both the feeling and the thought are subjective and have no authority over my actual character. The actual character is what it is. And it is only by learning what that character is and taking it into account and compensating for it, that I'm able to get some control over myself. Just like if I'm trying to move a heavy rock and I try to do it by picking it up, that is never going to work. And until I start engaging levers and pulleys and more people, it's hopeless. I have to use the laws of nature that apply before I'm going to be able to make a difference, an objective difference, whether it's an objective difference around me or an objective difference inside of me. To the Greeks, this is all obvious. To Aristotle, it's obvious. And so when he talks about essentialism, he's not using a definition like Greg McCune's definition. He's not talking about it being an approach to life and work and so on. Aristotle's talking about it as an approach to epistemology, and understanding that when you're talking about whether someone has red hair or likes pie or watches old Star Trek episodes, you're not touching on anything essential about them. But when we talk about whether I've got the alcoholic gene, now we're talking about something essential. It's part of my ethos. And as part of my ethos, it's a fountain of order from within my character that is always pushing, 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 driving. When I was a little boy, my parents were wildly out of control alcoholics. I mean, they used to brew it at home, and they want, of course, what a pusher wants to do is they want to get everybody else to be like them so they feel more comfortable. So they used to feed us beer. Here, have a sip, Ricky. Go ahead. And they'd all look at each other to confirm, yeah, let's get the kids started. Then we'll all feel more comfortable and we won't feel judged. So I remember the taste of beer in my mouth. And the way that I know that, unlike the rest of you, I'm an alcoholic, is that you could think about the taste of beer without doing what happens in my mouth, which is I salivate. I mean, literally while we were talking, I salivated. My body, on a genetic level, wants to get the alcohol in, right? And I don't have to like it or want it. And I don't even have to have done it for 50 years. But my body is still like, it's part of my ethos. It's binding upon me. It's essential. And you might think, well, how is this relevant to understanding Rick if he never drinks? Then how is being an alcoholic relevant? That's why I never drink. This whole shape of my life is determined by this piece of my character. It's going to be determined one way or the other, so I might as well intervene and make a choice. So this is what he's talking about. He's saying, this question of what do we know and how do we know it? How can you know a thing? What does it mean to understand something? This applies to spirituality. As well as it applies to man, as well as it applies to nature, it applies to the sacred, to the divine. I mean, the Greeks, in general, believed the sacred was every bit as real as the natural or the human. They thought, of course, for those who haven't been on these calls before, they thought the sacred occupied a space between the human and the natural. The sacred was the realm of the things that humans need to attend to if we know what's good for us. If we don't attend to those things, we're going to be in trouble. And that the reason we had to attend to those things is because they really matter to us, right? War really affects people. Infatuation and attraction really affect people. Wisdom and foolishness really affect people. They are objectively real things. There are forces in the cosmos that are bigger than we are, that have authority over us in the same way that alcoholic gene has authority over me. And as a result, we have to take them seriously. Other things may be merely incidental, but these things that they built their religion around, they were trying to assign a divinity to every part of nature that had authority over us, to use them like a periodic table of the elements of the parts of nature that we'd better watch. Or else. This is what it means, the term to Aristotle, to apply the question of essentialness to spirituality is going to happen within that kind of a framework. What is essential is to understand what has authority over us and to understand the limits and liabilities of the human ability to pay attention to the things that matter. Do we get distracted and forget? The story of Pygmalion and Galatea is partly a story about a guy who, puts everything on the importance of attraction and beauty, and to great cost from in every other part of his life. This is the part that rules him. When we talk about the Trojan War and the menace that Helen is, because everywhere she goes, men are falling all over themselves. And the only way they can prevent a civil war in Greece is for Odysseus to come up with a clever plan that all the kings are going to swear a blood oath on the river Styx. And the blood oath is, if any one of us tries to seize Helen from whoever she marries, all the rest of us agree to turn on that one and destroy him. And that way, only that creates enough existential terror within these egotistical, arrogant kings to remind them that even when they're under the sway of this massive power of sacred divine attraction, they still can't forget that they swore on the river Styx, and all their fellow brother kings saw them swear on the river Styx. It takes something of that scale to resist the terrifying attractiveness of Helen. Essential, right? They gotta notice what's essential. But because to the Greeks, what's sacred is related to the human and the natural, because it is the intermediary between the human and the natural. Um, it is a realm that, like self-knowledge, is easily overlooked, which is why if you want to go talk to the oracle, the very first thing you see is the writing on the wall that says, first know yourself. If you don't know yourself, you don't stand a chance to understand the sacred because you're going to be looking with the distorted lenses, distorted mirrors. Everything you perceive is going to be warped. So how can you do justice to the sacred when you don't even know what you are? Know thyself, right? So to the Greeks, this idea, you can't have authentic spirituality or authentic religion unless you put in the work to cultivate yourself to having an adult, mature, vernunft, eristic mind, capable of questioning its appetites and feelings and experiences, capable of questioning its ideologies and its logics, and accepting the possibility that real objective things have their own truth regardless of how we feel about them or what we think about them. The Greeks would have thought that's the starting place for being religious or spiritual. You have to start there. Without that, you got nothing. And then fideism comes along and says, forget about all that. Don't worry about it. Just have faith that what I tell you is true. Just believe, and that's enough. That's all you need. You don't need to understand yourself. You don't need to understand nature. You don't need to understand the gods. Just believe and obey. This is the topic that is the topic of chapter 9 that Ken is talking about when he says faith understood as a vice. To say it's understood as a vice, which we're going to get to in sentence 3 in a second, is again to evoke Aristotle with virtues and vices, both of which are Roman words, not Greek words, but arete and hamartia. Do you have the essential excellences that make it possible for your species to survive? Arete, that's the virtue to the Greeks. And vice, missing the mark. You, did you aim at the right thing, and were you able through autarkia and autology and autonomia, were you able to actually deliver on that thing? Or is this something that strengthens you and makes you healthier as a species, or is it something that it's bad to want to even want it, and it will vitiate and weaken you to pursue that thing? Now, the Greeks are obsessed with these differences, virtue versus vice. This is what it means to them, and to them, to just want to believe and not want to know is a classic example of hamartia. It's a vice. It sets you up for failure because it means you're not interested in self-knowledge. You're not interested in knowing about nature. You're not even interested in knowing about God. You just want to obey and believe. They think to know about God, you have to struggle for it. You can't just accept, what somebody told you. That's the opposite of spirituality. Now, I've been talking for a while, but this was all to set up this premise. I read these sentences again this morning. I thought about the title. I went back and reread the whole thing to this point, and I realized I'd really missed this framework. But on a second reading, it's unmissable between the Kierkegaard and the Nietzsche and the Aristotle and the Plato and he's clearly laying out this premise. Okay, Stephen, you want to come off mute and tell us what you just put into the chat? Because that's good stuff.
Yes, yes. You know, there's a justification by faith. It's not really a point I've explored that much. You got a priorism, the idea that there's certain truths we can know intuitively. Well, we use rational thought, for example. Rational thought is the idea that you can measure one thought against another. Again, we're back to the argument I was making before. Uh, Normal rationalism in the objective world is the idea that you can grab something in the objective world and measure it against other things. Let's say the length of a stick. And I can say, well, that distance is so many stick lengths, or, you know, the foot of the ruler or something like that. I'm putting my grab hands into the environment, you know, and I'm manipulating stuff inside the chamber. But that world can be demonstrated. I can measure two things against the other. But in the world of thought, that's no longer so easy. Okay, yeah, perhaps we could use some demonstrations of where, well, fideism, where you might think it's well, it's sort of the implication is it's gone wrong somewhere. In the Middle Ages, fideism strayed from the path that was set by a priorism. But look, I'm the church. I've got God on my side. Don't worry. Whatever problems, if you put your faith in God, everything will work out for the good in the long run. For example, the crazed preacher who takes you to South America and says, put your faith in God. Oh, well, they're coming after me now. Let's all commit suicide.
Enjoy this Kool-Aid.
Yeah, so perhaps some demonstrations of in history where fideism has diverged from a priorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to call on Sharon in a second, but I do want to add something to what you said that kind of makes the point. You know, it's the example of Jim Jones in South America really underscores the issue that the problem with fideism as a substitute for authentic spirituality is that it works great if the context is perfect. And it works so-so if the context is mixed, but it works disastrously if the context is bad. You put your faith in someone who has your worst interests at heart, and it's the doom of you to have done that. If on the other hand, you happen to be in a nunnery in which it's a particularly wise bunch of nuns. I mean, they've really done their homework. They've tried to get close with God. They've studied that, they've scrutinized themselves, they've thought about human nature. And if you are a fideist in that context and you trust them utterly, you might have a spectacularly good life. You might do all the right things. But you take that same person and you put them in Jim Jones's cult and now they're dead. It is a mode in which there is no immune system, which is a problem. If there weren't any psychopaths or sociopaths, if there are no con artists, fideism might be a more viable way of life, or even approach to spirituality. But when there's not only is there the capacity for human error, which the Greeks were obsessed with, right? I mean, they said to be mortal is to be stupid. It drove them up the wall, and they hated to be stupid. They'd rather die than be stupid. They said mortality, yeah, we die, that sucks. Yeah, everything that we make is eventually going to fall down, and yeah, that sucks even more. But the thing that sucks the most is that we're so dumb. We hate being dumb. You know, in that context, fideism is a problem, but not as big a problem as it is in a context where there are just dishonest people who mean you ill. In that context, fideism is desperately dangerous. And when he talked about telemedia, in one of the things that I cited, he had the phrase telemedia, and he's talking about televangelism, which all of us grew up with on television in the 1970s and 1980s. All these people saying, "Oh, you retired people who are now, reduced to eating cat food. You don't quite have enough money to make ends meet. Give me what little you have, and I will pray for God to send you to heaven." And and robbing all these impoverished people of their last pennies by through their fideism, their will to believe. It's the kind of thing that happens when you mix con artists with gullible people. Fideism is a will to gullibility. It's which is what makes it dangerous. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, this has been a very interestingly complex discussion. And I have to say, I got lost in some of it. But there are just a couple of points I wanted to make.
Sorry.
Authentic spirituality, which undergirds faith, really requires a perspective. And that perspective can be enhancing and could also be detracting. But perspective, so Jim Jones, those followers has faith. And that was really very, 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 very bad. They all died, right? But the Christian church says that if you believe in Christ and his teaching, then you should have a good life. And you know, that's where you have things that come out of it, like the prosperity gospel that this guy in Texas, I forgot his name right now, preaches about a lot. That's all based on the fundamental of faith. Now, the paragraph that we're reading for the last couple of weeks, where it says, what are the implications of founding a religion on a cult of faith or fideism? And I found the sentence very interesting where it says, it embraces as if it were the most complete virtue, the vice of somnambulism, which means you're kind of sleepwalking. And the chapter in the Bible that talks about faith is Hebrews chapter 11. And the first sentence catches my eye because it says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And then it goes and it gives lots of examples. Abel, Noah, and Abraham is the person that we talked about most in the Bible relating to the potential sacrifice of Isaac, of his son Isaac. He was going to do it because he believed in God, and God asked him to, no matter what the outcome is going to be. So what I want to sum up by saying that faith is an operative, but how you implement it just depends on where you end up.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's authentic spirituality can supply the larger context that faith needs to be functional. You know, if it's what you were talking about the perspective. You know, it's what it's interesting the way that he's tackling this, because what Ken is talking about here, on the one hand, we're in the section about medievalism, but on the other hand, he is frequently skipping out of the medieval worldview and into the modern versions of Christianity. And in doing that, he's frequently not talking about modern Catholicism, although he occasionally does. He's frequently talking about Protestantism. And in that context, you know, we have to acknowledge that there are Protestant doctrines that say you cannot be saved by good works, only by faith alone. And this is the major breach with the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church says faith and good works. You know, you can't just pray and have faith that you'll go to heaven, and then you do. You actually have to take care of people. You actually have to do some good things here. Your prayers are all well and good, and you know, you see that with the, well, I'm not gonna get into the modern politics, but you know, it comes down to this question of what else is there alongside the faith? What is the nest for the faith? What is the framework for the faith? What is the context for the faith?
That's the perspective, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
And the perspective, and I think Geneva asked the question about how do you meld your spirituality and your faith, your individual spirituality and your faith. And that is, I don't want to say the magic, that is the essence of it, isn't it? Because today's evangelicals have a faith and a spirituality that's not the essence that Jesus taught, but it's operative. So faith can be wholesome and unwholesome in the same breath.
Yes.
Yes. Right. And so this is what I think Kenneth is trying to get at here when he says, idiotistically, at least the way I understand it, idiotistically, it lives utterly in its myopia. And that I thought was very powerful.
Yeah.
Yes. Am I off base here, or am I getting this?
You got it.
But the Hebrews chapter 11, and I sat here and I had to figure it out. It has so many examples from the Old Testament and the New Testament about faith, and it has different manifestations.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna get to Hebrews. It's gonna be a lot of fun. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And
Was that premature? It just seemed like that's
it's
what we're
relevant.
talking about now.
It's relevant. I'm glad you brought it up. It's relevant.
Okay.
All I meant by my comment is I'm looking forward to doing a deeper dive into Hebrews because, yeah, it's got this stuff in it. And one of the things that I need to look at is the timing of Hebrews. I think the current assessment is it probably wasn't Paul who wrote it, but it was probably a student of Paul's, someone in Paul's movement, because it has a lot in common with Paul. There's a lot of Pauline spirit in Hebrews, but some of the theology is a little more developed, and it kind of references situations that arose after Paul's death. Um, so what we're going to see in Hebrews is sort of the next stage in the development of Christianity after Paul. In the same way that when we read Q and Thomas, we're seeing how the followers of Jesus began trying to understand and assimilate and work with Jesus's teachings. So the thing about faith, partially it depends on timing. Like, is this partly a reaction to the earlier belief that Jesus was going to come back during people's lifetimes, but now people are dying? So where's Jesus? Is this why we're shifting to the focus on faith as intensely? Is it because they're trying to get people to understand, okay, whether or not we're right about the timing, you got to have faith about the idea, about what's involved here, or is it something else? What is the real concern that they have? And I haven't looked closely enough to know, but they're beautiful passages. They're powerful. Um, they remind me of Galatians has passages which we're going to talk about next week where he's setting up opposites against each other, and it's this powerful poetic sequence. And this is like that, right? This faith sequence is like that.
Can I just say one last thing, because I think that this also refers to faith, and it's the last sentence but one in the paragraph where it said the Greeks understood very well the difference between this base subjectivism, which is the perspective, and the noble inwardness they had in common with Christianity. But Christians on the whole were nowhere near so discriminating.
Yes.
I thought that was very good.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think we're gonna get to that today because it explores this problem. Thank you, Sharon. As always. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Trying to find that unmute button. It's one of the hardest things I do. But I think here Kenneth is largely pointing out that fideism leads to abandoning the examination. That's what's gone. And that would be what went not that Plato may have been an a priorist, and I don't want to argue that, but if he was, he certainly examined critically the base statements from which his arguments began. And what Christianity, that the current and Christianity that's being discussed in this paragraph is one that tempts one to abandon that examination. Don't think about your faith. Believe your faith. Make it an act of will in a willful ignorance, almost. A willful acceptance without without performing the examination. I mean, at the end of his life, Socrates, or the character Socrates, or whatever, in the Apology, the unexamined, that's where he says that's the dialogue where Socrates sort of sums up his life. But he doesn't say that, hey, these things are absolutely objectively true. He says, these are things that no person, I've examined them, and no other person who's tried to examine me or examine these propositions, which basically were moral propositions in the Apology, where he's talking about how you should treat other people, have shown me they're wrong. So they're in a sense like they're the best of modern science. What you're left with at any time is the unrefuted. You're not left with the absolute true. You're left with, this is the best we seem to know at the time. And well, that's enough of that. I also wanted to say something kind of looking back at what Stephen wrote. Not that, and this is not that I differ, but he says, where is it? It contrasts with empiricism by arguing that the mind or inherent logic provides the framework for understanding. Well, one of the things in this division that I think you should see is that the mind does provide the framework. It may not provide the framework of logic or meaning, but all of our sensory perceptions are as much based on us as on the object perceived. You know, we only see this narrow spectrum of light. We only see this narrow spectrum of sound. We only have, tactile senses for certain size object. Yes, even if we're a strict empiricist, this is one thing. People say, Kant got it wrong. And I'll say Kant got it wrong. But when Kant says the mind provides categories by which we interpret the world, there is some truth there. It clearly does. And every empiricist should understand that. And I know Stephen does. So, but it's a priorism. You have to examine, just like you have to examine your empiricism. You have to examine your theories or base thoughts. And I'll throw in a useless fact. Theory is from the Greek theorein, to see. In fact, it meant see literally in Greek. And a good example is like in the Meno, where you see see with your eyes. The slave boy sees with his eyes that the square drawn on the diagonal is twice the size of the original square. He saw it. And it wasn't a theory, it was actual seeing. Okay, that's enough useless stuff, but
This self-deprecation always kills me because you're always saying something juicy that we really appreciate. And then you'll say, so much for this trash. And we're all like, no, stop it, Donald. Trash.
well, yeah, and I should apologize for last week to one of the Donnas. I think I don't speak for Kenneth. I know him. I've known him well for a long time, and sometimes I think I understand him. But you have to understand also that almost all of what I've ever learned about philosophy came from him. Yeah, you know, I'm not an independent observer of Kenneth Smith. I'm
Sample size of one.
I'm a student that had my brain and my overwhelmed by him at a young age, and kept reading him. But I think that this stuff. I mean, Plato did it just like. I mean, Kenneth. You know, you say, oh, we'll give up deductive reasoning a priori. But, you know, deductive a priori reasoning is child's play compared to inductive reasoning, where you attempt to construct logic chains backwards from actual occurrence to something like first principles or the base case or whatever. You know, by giving up that, we haven't made things easier for ourselves. We've made things harder. And to defend my Saint Plato, go. I think it's in the Theaetetus where he talks about they're trying to solve some kind of a mathematical problem, but he talks about what he called Socrates kind of called the theory of hypotheticals, where we have this and we want to show it, which we want to somehow show that it's true. But what we do is we say hypotheticals, it's inductive reasoning. Well, if we knew this, then we could prove what we want to prove. But what would it take to prove that? And there's no clear way that there's just one backwards chain that this inductive logic takes you through. But he just called it the method of hypotheticals, that you construct hypotheses from which you could possibly deduce what it was in hope of finding, you know, getting some insight into what's going on. Stephen's already on me here. I'm going to be quiet before I get.
Thank you.
Don't be quiet yet. I just have a quick question based on something that you said. May I, Rick?
Yeah, please.
So if.
Oh, sorry. You got to unmute. I accidentally trying to.
So Donald, I got a question. So you talked about the examination of this entity called faith. Is that what you said? If faith has to be examined, is it still faith, or is faith a product of the divine? And you just have to believe. And I come back again to this perspective. I'm asking the question, how it was analyzed and presented throughout time.
Well, I know less about theology than I know about philosophy, so I don't really know what to say. But I would think that yes, your faith has to be examined, and I don't know. I mean, but I would say that because I've read the same books. Where is my understanding of Protestant Christianity come from? Well, I had to take Kierkegaard in school like other people. And for me, he that's kind of where. So I don't know. Maybe I haven't done the examination. I would say in this epistemological scheme we're talking about, it would be necessary. You ought not to take up faith without examining what you're being asked to believe. Now, but that may be unsatisfying.
I don't know what the answer is. I'm just asking.
I don't know. Well, I don't know what the answer is.
He's questioning, right? I don't know.
Well, we may question right up until our death.
Right.
Oh, yes, because we're human, we're entitled to actually know these things. That's written down somewhere, isn't it? I turned over a rock in my yard, and it was written right there. We have the right to know.
I think the only right we're born with as mortals is the right to be wrong, right? To err as human.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I think I think there is some that like as Stephen says, these sort of moral or value truths. They're different from scientific or things. There's like, of course we can eat babies. We can cut them up in small enough pieces and they'll fit in our mouths and we can chew them and swallow them.
But we shouldn't.
But we shouldn't. But there is, we've been mistreated by other people. We've been misunderstood. We've dealt with people that lack empathy for other human beings. These things, in a different way perhaps, are as experiential as mass and force and electrical charge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like to get beaten. And so I learned from that. I ought to stop beating other people. They might not be liking it either.
Right.
So there is kind of an empirical, examinable realm of human experience that does contribute to values. They don't necessarily just came down from the mountain carved into stone tablets. They were things that we learned from trying to live together, having to live together, sometimes it's very trying to live together, but having to live together, we've learned what better ways to treat other people, to behave, about ends that we should pursue and shouldn't pursue. How I don't know, maybe Stephen,
David.
David. Now David's after me. Okay.
David came out of his quiet place to post something.
Now
for the benefit of those.
Now I know I've sinned.
For those watching the live stream who can't see necessarily the chat, it is a rare day when David posts some stuff in the chat, but he did today. His first thing he posted is "Absolute faith corrupts as absolute power" by Eric Hoffer, and then he quoted G.K. Chesterton. Reason is itself a matter of faith. It is an act of faith to assert that our thoughts have any relationship to reality at all. He's not, yeah, right. These were excellent choices, David. Thank you. I'm going to call him Geneva in just a second. But I do want to add that, there's an issue here with regard to faith and examination. That, we went back all the way to the first paragraph at the start of today's seminar to look at the opening sentences. And there's that quote about the unexamined life, which he actually puts in quotes to make sure you don't miss the point. He's quoting Plato, quoting Socrates. The unexamined life. And what Socrates says, the unexamined life is not worth living for a human being. It's it's not that it's not worth living for anyone. It's not worth living for a human being. And this ties into the whole Greek study of Homo sapiens as the animal that has a unique problem. We don't have sophrosune. They do. My cat does not need to examine her life. She'll be just fine. And that red flowering currant in the backyard, it's doing great. It doesn't need to examine its life at all. Because that's sophrosune. But because we don't have sophrosune, can't have sophrosune, can at best only simulate it if we work really hard at it. We are able to err in a way that most organisms can't. It's not that they don't make mistakes, but it's that in general, they've got a compass pointing them in reasonable directions. They may not always be the right direction, but on average, to roll the dice, that's probably the right choice. We have no such compass. We just have enthusiasms which come from nowhere and go from nowhere. You know, what we're being enculturated with, what our experience is. It's just sort of random whether we're obsessed with, old baseball trading cards or not. And that is that our enthusiasm. Um, and the problem that means for us is we've got no guarantees that even on average, we're going to be interested in the right things. And if we're not on average guaranteed to be interested in the right things, it means it calls everything into question. And that includes, are we following Martin Luther King Jr. or are we following Jim Jones? We have to ask ourselves the question, because the difference between Jim Jones and Martin Luther King Jr., I'm here to tell you, is enormous. We can say all people are equal, but they're obviously not equal. I would much rather follow Dr. King than Jim Jones. And I hope you agree with me about that, because I want long, happy lives for all of you, and that's not going to happen if you're following Jim Jones. So one of the reasons to apply Socrates as the unexamined life is not worth living to the question of faith, the easy the easy atheist assumption is, well, you have to question whether there even is a God. It's like, yeah, that's the least part of the problem. The bigger part of the problem is we have to question our ability to perceive right from wrong and sacred from profane. Are we worshiping something sacred, or are we just being idol worshipers, cultists? How are we going to figure out the difference? Because I'll tell you, the cult leader will call himself the same kinds of things the authentic leader will call himself. Yes, I'm your teacher, follow me. You're not going to be able to tell them apart by that basis. You're going to have to look at yourself and what are you attracted to? And if you have a long history of attaching yourself to cults instead of genuine religious leaders, maybe you should be skeptical about the latest person you've attached yourself to, right? But if you've got a long tendency of attaching yourself to wonderful religious mystics who give you beautiful spiritual insights, maybe you're in luck this time. Maybe you've got a good momentum going. But you have to ask the question: what am I looking at? William Blake, as a man is, so he sees. Kenneth loves that quote, right? When we look at the world, we don't see it objectively, whether it's a sacred thing or a natural thing or a human thing. We don't see it as it actually is. We see it as we project our desires and our character and ideologies upon it. All of reality and everything we look at is a Rorschach test. So until we straighten this stuff out, we're going to have a hard time recognizing the sacred. Next thing you know, we're giving our money to televangelists instead of to charities that are actually taking care of people. Now, that problem is not a them problem. I mean, yes, it'd be great if there weren't a bunch of con artists. It's an us problem. And that requires examination. That's the examination. And that's the whole title of this chapter, the whole thrust of it up through paragraph 5. This is his concern, is it is entirely justified for a God to have faith in something. They're a God. But when a human being has faith in something, you have to ask, is this something that they should have faith in? Or is this something self-serving or self-destructive that they should not have faith in? Because you can't trust Homo sapiens to be clear about that. We're going to differ person by person, situation by situation, and that requires examination. So this is the long-winded answer to your really good question. I mean, it's an excellent question, such as it is so far. Geneva, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Okay, well, I raised my hand for one thing, but now I've got another question.
Do
But
both.
it's along the lines of the faith thing. I think we talked earlier about the spirit of nature and the spirit of the person, maybe probably or maybe coming from the same source, that they were somewhat attached to each other. But I'm not, and it's a natural kind of phenomenon, I guess. But I'm not sure exactly where faith comes into the picture. Is that part of the spirit, or does one have to be Christian in order to have that element in their, I don't know, in their chest of things that we live by? Because if you're not a Christian, maybe there isn't faith. But where does that come from exactly? That was my first question. And then this sophrosune. I Is it true that human beings don't have it, or do they just ignore it? They just don't pay attention to it. Because it would seem to me that if this spirit is a natural type phenomenon, that it probably comes with sophrosune, just for existence alone. And certainly one could ignore the signs of, oh, you may not want to go that way. I have done that myself. I don't even know how many times until I've sort of trained myself of late to, if that thought comes in, I better pay attention to it. It's like, well, let's just pay attention to this and do it. So I don't know where that thought or those thoughts come from. It sounds like it could be sophrosune. But I thought I heard somebody saying that humans don't have that.
That was me.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I think we may ignore it. We have the ability to override it or ignore it, whereas maybe the cat doesn't have that ability. So I just wanted to ask about that because I kind of feel like when those thoughts pop into my head, which I typically ignore, and I'm always wrong when I ignore them. So now I've been trying to train myself to pay attention to them, do something with them. And maybe that's sophrosune. I don't know. So those were my questions.
So why don't I take them in reverse order? So with regard to sophrosune as a compass in the brain points every member of a species to grow up to live the identical kind of life. And the problem is Homo sapiens evolved to grow up to live very different kinds of lives. Fisherman, reindeer herder, right? Among the Sami people. Two completely different ways of life. It's the same people. They speak the same language, and yet they live two completely alien ways of life. And the reason is that we don't have sophrosune. This was what evolution figured out for us, is our clever pet trick is that we aren't limited to one ecosystem and one way of life. By stripping away the instincts that gave us sophrosune, that give all their animals and plants and fungi and amoebas sophrosune, they created and by giving us in return a addictive mimetic, a desire to imitate. I mean, every human being feels the invitation to bark like a crow, bark like a dog, caw like a crow, cluck like a chicken. We all remember what that feels like when we could accomplish that. It's like, I used to raise chickens. I prided myself on my ability to imitate them. How many times driving down the road, you see cows and you go moo. I mean, there is a thing in us that wants to imitate. And that mimetic imitative power made us cultural animals. It meant that we could imprint on each other and what we were doing. Instead of being hardwired to all grow up to be fishermen, we had the sophrosune stripped away, and evolution gave us two substitutes. What you're talking about are the substitutes. So we got enthusiasms. We can be possessed by excitement about something. And when we're enthusiastic about something, then we respond to that thing as though we had sophrosune for it. we notice it, we pay attention to it, we care about it, we're obsessed with it, whether it's, Star Trek reruns or what have you. And the other thing that comes with that, we have intuition. And our intuition is learned. Just like our enthusiasms are learned, our intuition is learned. And so the intuitions in one culture could be radically different from the intuitions in another culture. But the people in that culture will have those intuitions. And if it's a healthy culture, there'll be healthy intuitions. And they get shaped up by your life experience, traumas that you've had, and great experiences you've had, until your intuition starts to be, for a healthy person, it's a reasonable guide a lot of the time in the circumstances that you grew up to live in. And that is playing a function for us analogous to what Sofrosune does for a cat or an oak tree. But it's a different mechanism, because all acorns are going to try to grow up to be oak trees. They're going to try to become the same thing. Not an identical version of it, but that live the same life, have the same goals. All the cheetahs want to run fast. They all do. There's none of them that says, "Yeah, I want a bicycle." They can't. The Sofrosune won't let them. And that's how you know we don't have Sofrosune, or else we'd all grow up to be fishermen, or whatever the thing was that was going to be our way of life. But you're right. We couldn't survive without something like Sofrosune. So evolution gave us this other pair of things, enthusiasms and intuitions. On the first thing, we're talking about, now that I've immersed myself in Sofrosune, my brain's going, wait, where we were talking about faith? We were talking about faith.
Faith, like where the faith comes from, because we were maybe saying that the spirit in nature and the spirit in the
Yes.
human are, I don't want to say synonymous, but come from the same place. But is there a third element called faith that comes with that, or where does the faith come in? Or is that only a Christian thing?
They're both great questions. This is another great question, Geneva. So, there's a huge difference between faith and faith alone. Man is saved by faith alone, which is a Protestant doctrine in some Protestant sects, is a very different proposition from man is saved by faith and good works, for example. In the context of faith and good works, faith can't possibly be the same thing that it is to say John Calvin, right? Who thinks you can be saved by faith alone. These are two different things sharing the same word. And the differences between them are so big that it caused a split in European religion. I mean, a massive, gigantic split. They fought wars. Huge, millions of people died, over this split. It's a gigantic change in difference. And yet English just papers them over with the same word. It's both faith. Even the Latin, because they're fighting over the Latin at this back at in the Renaissance and the Reformation. So pistis, they're arguing over, who's right about what pistis is. Is it something that is part of a larger, of a well-balanced sacred diet, as the Catholics would have it, or is it the one and only element you have to have in order to get to heaven, as Calvin and some others would have it? Depending on which way you answer it, you can't possibly be talking about the same thing. It's just not possible. And then we throw in all the colloquial definitions of faith. So, for example, when I step out of this chair and stand up, I have faith that the floor will hold me up. Now, as physicists will tell you, that's absurd, because it's mostly empty space, and so am I. Why the hell we don't fall through each other is one of the fabulous mysteries of physics, and deals with force fields and electrical repulsion and all this crap. But it's still mostly empty space. It's almost entirely vacuum. It looks solid, and it's not. But we take the step anyway. We take science class, and the physics teacher laughs at us and says, no, it's emptier than that. It's emptier than the solar system. It's emptier than you could possibly imagine. It's almost entirely a vacuum. It's just a teeny bitty particle flying around and creating this giant wave function. And when it finally lands for us as kids, and we really get that it's a goddamn vacuum with a few tiny bits whizzing around, then we look at the ground differently. We think about all the bad dreams we ever had. What if the floor is fire? Like, well, what if I'm going to fall through the floor? We watch superhero cartoons or read comic books in which people could actually pass through walls, and the explanation is, well, it's all mostly empty space. And the child mind inside of us is bugged. Well, why can't I just push through that? Why does the floor hold me up? And in the end, what convinces people is not the truth. Because the truth is far too complicated to understand. I mean, we can memorize it and regurgitate it on a test. We can do the math, we can do the equations, blah, blah, blah. But the intuition doesn't make sense because we associate empty space with something that can't hold you up. So if it's mostly empty space, but it holds us up anyway, then we just have to take it on faith after a certain point. We can add as much scaffolding and training wheels of equations and memorized answers for tests as we like. But at some point, we just have to trust that the force fields of the electrons whirling around the protons and neutrons in the nucleus are the negative charges will repel us and we won't go through the floor. We'll be held up as though it were solid, even though it's almost entirely empty. This is faith, right? And you know that song in the musical Annie, tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you tomorrow. You're only a day away. The sun will come up tomorrow, and it's just faith, right? That the sun will come up, and it partly at that level, it's Verstand instead of faith, because the Verstand says, well, the sun came up yesterday, and the sun came up the day before yesterday. In fact, the sun came up every day that I can remember. So the pattern suggests that the sun will come up tomorrow. But what's my proof? I mean, I have all kinds of explanations for why it should come up tomorrow. I do. But, you know, what if Galactus comes and eats the Earth before tomorrow? Then the sun won't come up tomorrow. I don't know that that's not going to happen. I'm pretty sure it won't happen, but I can't be 100% sure. How would I know that? I'm not a god. I don't know everything in the universe. I know a very teeny tiny bit. And so, you know, there is this, well, kind of the point that Stephen's asking about, do I have faith in patterns? So I'm saying all human beings, we're hardwired to have a certain amount of faith in patterns. And that's our Verstand. That's that faculty, the quote left brain, analytical, systematizing, abstracting, pattern matching faculty in us that a hyper intellectual lives inside of, the land of theory. It's only possible for there to even be Banausoi because we are hardwired to find patterns appealing and interesting. We are by nature enthusiastic about patterns. It's why so many of us grow out of Dulea. We grow out of being stuck in the griff and and expand into you know, the intellectual life of Verstand. We do that because our brain is hardwired to find patterns very interesting, and our tendency to attend to them and then also to take comfort in them and find them familiar is what Hegel's talking about when he says the familiar is for that very reason not recognized for what it truly is. As we take faith, again, very different from Catholic faith, very different from Calvinist faith, very different from, you know, why does the ground hold me up faith? But we take a kind of faith from what is familiar. We put our faith in what is familiar, and we kind of can't help it. I mean, unless you take magic mushrooms or datura or something to really shake your brain up out of its accustomed ruts, it is all of our nature to have a kind of faith in these patterns. And Donna asks about, well, is there a difference between faith and trust? And this is where we get into trouble. I mean, Donna's asking exactly the right question. Modern English does not give us the tools we need. I've just cited 4 different kinds of things that the English word faith is a reasonable approximation for. And the dictionary is not going to help us with this. It's going to list all 4 of those plus a whole bunch more and say, this is all faithiness, sort of faith, sort of somewhere in the vicinity of faith are all of these things. And English almost never goes any further than that. To say, well, how do I distinguish between them? I need different words for these different things. And modern English goes, forget about it. I'll give you words for other kinds of things, or things that have emotive qualities, or things that might be helpful for selling cigarettes or cars or condoms or what have you. But modern English is not interested in drawing these important distinctions that would help us to understand the structure of our minds and how we relate to nature and God and other human beings. That's like, the market's not interested in those things in the way that medieval thinkers were. Medieval thinkers weren't just interested in it, they thought this was the most important stuff. And it's the same for classical thinkers. They thought this was the most important stuff. As Donald likes to point out, you read Aristotle, and man, that man gets right down to business. I mean, he starts drawing distinctions and making comparisons because he's trying to help us organize the way we understand the world or ourselves or ethics or what have politics. He's immediately trying to get these fine distinctions, and classical Greek gave him the tools he needed to do it. Just like German, with enough bending, gave Hegel the ability to do it in German. But modern English won't let you do it. What is faith? Well, ask 350 million Americans what faith is, and you'll get 350 million answers. And a bunch of them will be repeating each other because they all got it from the same place. But you still end up with at least 1,000 different definitions of faith. And so, how are we to have this conversation together in the last year and a half for the next year and a half? How are we to talk clearly about these things when we're armed with these blunt tools that not only can mean different things, but can mean opposites? We have the literally figuratively problem when it comes to faith. Some of the things we mean by faith are the opposite of other things we mean by faith. And so I'm not saying it's impossible to discuss this, but I'm saying, man, is it hard.
So it's learned activity then, not okay. Yeah.
But we may have a capacity for faith that's hardwired into us. But what evolution had in mind for it, how does it help us as a species, is something that is it requires. Your question is so interesting and important that I promise you we will come back to it over and over for the rest of the year and a half that we go through the Middle Ages, because faith is like a centerpiece of the medieval worldview. But I will say this. One of the distinctive features of Christianity as a religion, especially in its medieval format, is its insistence on faith as the heart of the religion. Jesus did not have that. From the fragments that we have, from Q, from Thomas, from other sources, that was not a centerpiece of Jesus's religion. And we will be tracing over the next 6 months how the religion changed after Jesus to make that a centerpiece of the religion. But it's certainly not a part of ancient Greek religion, right? If you said you didn't believe in Poseidon, someone would just chuck you off the boat into the ocean and say, do you believe now? He's right, you're in him. Poseidon is the ocean. He's not like, the spirit of the ocean floating somewhere invisible where you can't actually measure him. If you're wet, that's Poseidon. If you ever fell in love, that's Aphrodite right there. If you ever in your life had an aha experience where a really good idea came to you and it was a good idea, that's Athena, right? I mean, these things were not things you had to have faith in. You could literally observe them, and everybody did. And so the religion, the idea that faith was important to religion or spirituality would have been like blah, 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 ginger, blah, blah, blah. I would have no idea what you're talking about if you tried to explain religion in those terms to a classical Greek, because it just wasn't. Nor to the Romans. What is religion? Religion is the things we do. We do these things. We have always done these things. It's this day. Our family always goes, comes down from the mountain and goes to this temple, and we do these things that we do, and then we go home, and that's the religion. It has this the things we do quality to it. And the Greeks had some of that too. But it certainly didn't have the quality of, now I know your eyes and ears tell you that this is not happening, but I need you to believe it is. And if you don't believe it is, you're going to hell. That's a particularly medieval construction. And again, that's a different kind of faith. But I think you're right. All of these different kinds of faith are playing off of something that's in us. But what that thing is going to take some work to get out. So again, as always, Geneva, great questions. You get us all thinking. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, the wolves and the con artists of the world. Otherwise, I could just be a contented sheep, which would be the ideal, munching on the grass in the golden green valley. But I remember the film The Jerk, when Steve Martin gets rich. He feels he should help people out with his money, and so all the con artists line up at his house. You had the Texan oil magnate who comes up with a sob story, takes off his Texan hat, explaining how his Learjet has cracked leather seats, and he feels really embarrassed when he flies people around in his Learjet. He needs some money to replace the seats. But I mean, when they're having the furor over the food stamps, that's of course, they bring up the case where there was a family that had, bought a $120,000 car. Now you assume it's a loan. So they're probably working, they're probably making money, but they've taken up on such a huge loan. Interest rates have risen that to make ends meet, they're relying on food stamps. Well, anyway, the food stamp people told them they had to sell their car and get something cheaper. I imagine you could probably buy a frugal, sort of affordable car in America, for 20,000 or something, not 120,000. Now, this whole thing with the banks lending money to people they shouldn't be lending money to. This is a modern disease. And the banking system, for example, will create home loans, on, say, 5% down payment or even less. And of course, there's a risk there, but they will get an insurance policy on the risk. This is where all these things they call derivatives come in. Of course, if the people default on the home loans, then the insurer has to pay out. And back in the global financial crisis, it was just a mirage. What was it? AGL was the insurer of the whole thing, and it was just a mirage. The banks had created an ambush for the government. That was a Republican government. They said to the Republican government, well, you're just going to have to bail us out. I mean, we loan money, and if we win, we take the profit. And if we make bad loans and lose, well, you, the taxpayer, must reimburse us for our bad luck. The Republicans were dragging their feet on it, and then you ended up with a change of president, Obama's in. And I thought, Obama would be straight enough not to put up with this. But he's got all these concerns on his mind, how he got into power, who he owes favours to. And the first day of his presidency is virtually the boat is ready to sink. So that's a temptation. Am I going to be honest, or am I going to survive? This is like day one, and he chooses, they've got him at the table, they've ambushed him. He was running in, everyone's helping him getting elected. He spent all that money, he owes that many favours, he's sitting at the big table. And the bankers are all looking at him, sign on the dotted line. It's an ambush. And this is a situation in America at the moment that so many people are now, in this situation in the Western world, are taking advantage of welfare. But this is what Aristotle or Plato were warning about with democracy. You can sell your vote to the politician who'll promise you everything. And in former times, there was usually a way out. But we might have reached a world where they can no longer kick the can down the road. But people have faith. The German government, who were inept, years of ineptness, had faith they could close down their nuclear power, and somehow magically alternative power would suddenly appear that would solve the problem down the track. it didn't appear. You know, there might be certain improvements in the efficiencies of solar panels or whatever. Not enough to make up a dent in what they closed down. They had faith. In America, they have faith that the government can just spend endlessly on things which don't create wealth. I mean, people who don't work for a living are not creating any wealth. They're just consumers. And you can't build an entire nation purely upon consumers. Somebody has to pay the bills. But they have this faith. They haven't. Look, 20 years ago, I explored the issues. I used to believe all that stuff that, you know, the government could just endlessly pay for stuff. And then I saw, well, no, it doesn't add up. But people haven't investigated. There's a lot of issues people haven't investigated, not just this, but a whole range of issues. And they're going on faith. The atheists are running around on the faith that good and evil are real things. This was Nietzsche's warning in The Madman, that you've had the church creating a grand narrative that's made us believe in these values are real. If I say good and evil, I was trying to explain this to the atheists on Saturday, that good in the particular is true. If I'm hungry, a McDonald's hamburger is good. If I'm starving to death, then a McDonald's hamburger is good. Or it could be really bad nutrition when I've eaten too many, and it's bad. That it's a particular, but we abstract the ideas of good and evil. Everything that's good, like good McDonald's hamburgers and good sheep and whatever, we generalize that there's this common quality of goodness. So, I mean, does good and evil float around in space like the flying spaghetti monster, which is what the atheists seem to believe? Is it just purely an abstract thought, or is there actually a metaphysically true good and evil? And of course, once you've generalized that into these abstract principles, you could abstract it further, grant them personality, and say, oh, now this general principle of good is God. This general principle of evil is the devil. But this is the thing, of course, the Christians' logic is actually better. If there is some all-powerful God, and this is the one disseminating, you know, the good and the evil, then you've got a guarantee. But the atheists seem to think that you can have general concepts of good and evil floating around in space like the flying spaghetti monster. And they're the ones that are telling the theists that they're fools. These fanatical religious atheists don't actually take apart what their beliefs are. It proves that they're sophists, because sophists are only interested in ideas as far as it serves their ambition. After that, they're not interested in the purity or the truth of ideas. Only what serves my wants. Now, Plato pointed out a philosopher is interested in the truth for its own sake. The love of wisdom, the love of truth. I pursue truth because I love to know. Whereas the sophist, I like ideas. They're very handy to serve my purposes. But we now live in a Western world which is maybe in a pipe dream that thinks, oh, look, everything's so far so good. Guy falls off the cliff, you keep on hearing the echo, so far so good, so far so good. Nothing's going wrong. Well, that was the grand financial crisis. Nothing's going wrong, nothing to see here. Anyway, sorry for my excessive rant. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I would address it, except it has so full of goodness and chunky things to talk about that it would take more than the remaining 19 minutes we have left. And I trust it will come up again because these are the recurring themes. You're bringing up the recurring themes on this, all these questions that get raised by the contrast between the medieval world and the modern world. And so I'm going to take the opportunity to get us back to the text. Um, I see John's got his hand up though, so let me call on John and then I'll take us to this fourth sentence of this paragraph. Go ahead, John. Come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, Rick. So regarding what Stephen was saying, I don't know if atheists necessarily think that, it's like good and evil is some kind of abstract reality out there somewhere in the universe, but I think it's more of like an extrapolation from their own experiences, like utilitarianism or something. It's like, what do we find valuable and how do we make more of that in the world and less of what we find to be bad? And then, something that kind of resonated with what he was saying about like the faith that people have is like in kicking the can down the road. Also, it's like everything we've seen is like in our lifetime and our parents' lifetime too, is like things getting better and better. So like we kind of have faith that things are going to get better and better and technology is going to get better and better. And that has to do with the debt too. It's like we have faith that maybe AI will save us from, the debt or, the debt crisis or something. And you had a word for it, I forgot what it was, like where the sun rises again and again. And you have faith that that's going to rise again, but it's not really faith. It's something else that you said it was. And I kind of feel like that applies to like the world progressively getting better. That idea, it's like, well, every year we've seen things getting better and better. So, we just assume that's going to happen. That's it.
Thank you, John. Yeah, it comes to this question of what is faith, and the ways in which modern English doesn't give us clear ways to talk about it. Part of what Stephen's bringing up is, whether or not it's about a specific thing he brings up, the general pattern he's bringing up is how much we assume about the world based on the past. And sometimes those assumptions are justified and sometimes they're not. And the problem is we don't know which is which. We'd have to be omniscient to be able to look ahead and see which of those assumptions is justified. I live in Seattle, so the sun coming up is only about a 50-50 proposition in the spring. Most days it's just more clouds. And the clouds get brighter and the clouds get dimmer, and that's the day. It's like so for people who really need to see the sun, Seattle can be a hellish place to live certain seasons. The thing that I was thinking about faith, that plays into what you said and what Stephen said, which I'll mention before I go back to the text, is isn't it on about our money, right? The US dollar is even though there's no gold standard anymore for the United States, we say, ever since Nixon, we say, well, that's okay because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of America. And of course, yeah, Donna's laughing because at this point, the United States doesn't have nearly as much faith and credit as it had sometime in the past. And part of it's for the reason Stephen's talking about is our debt has mounted up higher and higher. The value proposition of trusting that the United States is at some point going to pay all that back got smaller and smaller. And now that we're spending, is it $5 billion a day? I can't remember what it is that we're blowing on this absurd war. You can see the way that even Canada, our neighbor Canada, who many Americans, many United States citizens have, assumed is like the 51st state, is now making multilateral treaties with anybody but us because they don't have any faith or credit in the United States. And so this is always the thing, right? Is to what extent are the patterns that have held to date hold in the future, and to what extent have they been based on things that have been changing out of our sight and falling apart? And all of this comes into these issues of cosmos and chaos and so on. But I'm going to take us back to the text, because we could literally spend from now until the end of time talking about current events and how they play into this. And the one piece of editing I'm doing, and I'm not enforcing it or anything, but is we will have a whole segment that is about modernity, where we will really focus on the modern world. And so what I'm really trying to do, especially in the medieval period, is give the medieval period its due. And in that, I'm even pushing against Kenneth a little bit, because you'll notice Kenneth keeps slipping into talking about modern forms of Christianity. Medievalism is that period that we were all taught not to look at. We'd study the ancient world and then we'd skip ahead to the Renaissance. But that's 1,000 years of some interesting worldview, and he's meaning for us to focus on it, even if he can't always himself. So, talking about this question of fideism in paragraph 5, sentence 4, he goes on, fideism, lives wholly in the domain of inner currents. And this is what Stephen was talking about, the realm of feelings and ideas. It lives wholly in the domain of inner currents, of a wish world structured on puerile emotionalist reactions, desire for paternal approval, fear of eternal torment, the heaven and hell that these project. And it cannot begin to ask itself whether these are really ultimately morally true or spiritually responsible points of view. Right. So, we've talked before about Kenneth wants us to understand that both of the half-witted stages of development, the dualic stage in which we're using naive gnosis, experience and immersion to make all our decisions, and the half-witted Banausic perspective in which we're using theories and math and logic and the realm of ideas to make our decisions. That neither of these is desirable. Both of these has its kind of serious defects. That we're supposed to grow through them and into the whole-mindedness of pitting our noesis against our gnosis in a dialectic, so that they can critique each other, and not letting either of them be our master. And only then do we start being able to individuate and become a person, and to take reality as seriously as we take our own ideas and feelings. And so when he's talking about a wish world structured on puerile emotionalist reactions, he's certainly here, he's focusing on the defects of the dualic worldview, the emotionalist, immersive, immediate feeling side. And I can't remember if he addresses this anywhere else in the chapter. I reread it this morning. He's giving short shrift to something he cares every bit as much about as the dualic, which is the Banausic, the world of theories and calculations and logic and math is equally puerile. It's a puerile intellectualist reaction in which everything is being measured for, like a Procrustean bed. Does this fit my theory? Is this a valid logical syllogism? Does this make my spreadsheet balance come out in the right side of red versus black? These kinds of calculations are equally puerile, but instead of being emotionalist, they're abstractivist, they're intellectualist. And he sees that as equally flawed, even though he doesn't cite it here. He means it to be cited here. When he's talking about spirituality, he's saying that either side of that coin is a problem. It's only the whole, when we put the pieces together, that we have the potential to have authentic spirituality, he would say. And the problem is that when you tell people that they're supposed to believe on faith, they can do it in an emotionalist way in which they're afraid of hell and they want to make, Daddy, Papa God happy. And so it's all dualic. But they can also do it in a Banausic way, in which Pascal's wager. Well, if there isn't a God and I believe, then it doesn't hurt anything. But if there is a God and I don't believe, then I'll go to hell. So I choose to believe. As though you could fool God and he wouldn't realize that you didn't really believe in him. You were just hedging your bets, right? I mean, Pascal's wager has a major hole in it, which is it assumes you're fooling God. Right? Or it assumes you can make yourself believe something you don't believe just because you're concerned about the outcome. And that's the kind of intellectualism that is also appealed to by fideism. Believe these things or I'll burn you at the stake. Believe these things or you'll go to hell. Believe these things and you can rise within the church hierarchy. Believe these things and we will anoint you, Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day of the year 800, Charlemagne. I mean, there are ways in which the calculating personality can equally be attracted to these fideist frameworks, and have been. And it's a major point of Kenneth. He just forgot to make it in this paragraph. So all I'm doing is offering the counterbalance that If he had it to redo, he might come back and add that piece to it. He's equally concerned about it. And it cannot begin to ask itself whether these are really ultimately morally true or spiritually responsible. The idea that spirituality involves responsibility, the idea that morality can be ultimately true or false. These are very contra-modern ideas. Both of them are deeply contra-modern ideas because we treat this stuff as subjectivism. This is what Stephen is trying to get us to think about with the you can't eat babies. Well, which way do you mean that? Do you mean that objectively or do you mean that subjectively? And part of what he's doing here is he's asserting that to the classical worldview, there are things that are morally true or morally false, whether or not anybody figures that out. There is an objective reality to what sorts of relationships between man, God, and nature are functional and which ones are dysfunctional, which ones lead to the collapse of society, and which ones allow Homo sapiens to be a viable species with a future. Says these are issues of morality, but only from the standpoint of the classical worldview. From the medieval worldview, what makes them objective is God said so. And he objectively exists. He objectively said so, and therefore they're objective morality. But in the modern world, where we've overthrown God and we've overthrown nature, and now everything just comes down to what was the vote in the Senate, who has more money than who has a bigger army than who. It's a numbers game. As long as it's a numbers game, the numbers can always change. Yeah, you might be the richest guy now, but I start a new company, I make a bunch of money, I buy you out, and now you're poor and I'm rich. Haha. I mean, there is no ground to stand on in the modern world in which you can say that anything could be ultimately morally true. And this is part of what he's critiquing here. He's saying this weakness in the modern world was set up by the fideism, that half of the dialectic, the fideism insisted upon by the religious empire of the medieval period. It set the stage for what becomes the triumph of the spreadsheet runner, to the MBA and so forth. And he's saying the same thing when he talks about spiritual responsibility, this idea that things could be spiritually responsible or spiritually irresponsible. That's not New Agey, right? Isn't the New Age spirituality idea that anything we want to believe, we can believe? It's true if we want it to be true. If it makes us feel good, then that's what we choose to believe in. There is this modern, kind of flowy thing. And my mom did this a lot, and I did this when I was younger, so I understand it very well from inside and out. The idea that actually spirituality isn't just a fashion choice, and it's not a question of what pleases us, but that spiritual issues are actual objective issues. And what makes them objective is that we objectively have an ethos. Even if all our opinions about the ethos are subjective because we don't know ourselves very well, the thing itself remains real. And so its laws of growth and change and how that shapes our transformation and our decisions over time, and how those decisions and actions shape the society around us, those are objectively real. And therefore, we have responsibilities. It's kind of unfair to us because we have responsibilities about something we can't perceive very clearly, right? You can't just hold a ruler up to your character and say, oh, it's this. The way you can with your height. I can take a temp measure and I can tell you what my height is. I can have some responsibility about that, but I can't take responsibility for what's inside me if I don't even know what's there. And so it's natural to say, well, why should I be held accountable? Why should I be held responsible as though these things matter? Why can't I just pick and choose? I'll just believe what we always believed, or I will just negate that and pick something else, and then I'll just believe that because I like it. It satisfies me intellectually or emotionally or what have you. These are sort of the modernist takes. So the idea of spiritual responsibility is a little tough for us to grok, but it is a very medieval and ancient idea that these are real things. They have a real existence and they're actually important. They may not be what we think they are, but what they are matters. And we have to straighten ourselves out. Now, I'm going to call on Stephen in just a second, but I want to share one last bit here before I go on that's about this. And this is there you see that use of wish world, a wish world structure, a wish world. That's, boy, Kenneth, what a what a term. He has encapsulated there another Heracliteanism, right? What does Heraclitus say? Fragment 52. It would not be better if things happen to men just as they wish. The things we wish for are often the wrong things because we don't have sophrosune. We want what we're enthusiastic about, what we're intuitive about. If we have been raised in a healthy culture, then we can trust those enthusiasms and intuitions. But if we've been raised in an unhealthy culture, then we're going to long for things that aren't good for us. Like in the modern era, where we are told that our desire is God. Anything that we want, the market will provide. We just have to, go get it. And the question of, well, could there be some things that you could want that it would be bad if you had them? Heraclitus thinks it's obvious, but to us, that's sort of it's a contradiction in terms. Your desires are sacred. Well, how could you not, go get what you want? Live the dream, man, right? Whatever you want, go for it. Hitler had a dream. Go for the dream, Hitler. I mean, the modern response to people's desires and whether they're sick or healthy is incoherent because, of course, it's all based on a con game. We don't care if it's healthy or sick. We only care, can we make a profit off it? Look, a junkie. Let's get him hooked. Let's get him on our side. We want to collect all that pretty money from him. Now, maybe, what a healthy society would do is let's heal the person. Let's nurture them and help them to recover and live a healthy life. But in capitalism, the response is no, there's money in them, their desires. We need to tell them that whatever they want is sacred and they should go get it. So when he's talking about a wish world, he's evoking the ancient Greek skepticism about desire as a god. Say desire is not actually a god. Aphrodite, is about attraction specifically. But even if desire were a god to the ancient Greeks respond to their god skeptically. Just because a god says it, just because a god doesn't mean it's good for you. To be was one of the most common pieces of folk wisdom is to be the favorite of the gods, is to be in serious trouble. Because they represent great forces of nature and you are just a little mouse in the grass and we're likely to get stepped on. The gods were very interested in Oedipus. Things did not work out well for him. So, the Greeks have a different take on all this stuff. And what's hard to remember is that when people like Paul are writing, they're writing saturated not in the modern worldview, they're writing saturated in the Greek worldview. The Greco-Roman worldview. That's what they're emerging from. That's what they're taking for granted. That's what they're building the new Christianity out of. The Christianity that Jesus and Paul had in mind assumed now we're going back to Sharon, assumed a certain context, a certain perspective that we don't have anymore. And so now these things mean something completely alien to us compared to what they used to mean back in the day. Stephen, come off mute. We'll let you wrap us up for today. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, well, it's the big question. I did put that quote of Nietzsche in there. And of course, Nietzsche is exploring this issue because he's a believer in the science of his own day. Well, that quote way back earlier in the meeting. It's one of his 4 principles about the positives in Christianity. That, the Christianity has the legend of the Garden of Eden. This all-powerful God creates Adam, and then to make his life more difficult, he creates a woman. And he, gets the knowledge of good and evil and wanders off outside of the Garden of Eden. And the humans are rather clever. Cain's descendants discover all the arts of manufacturing metals and blah, blah, all this knowledge, because this being that walked out of the Garden of Eden was God-gifted smart as well as stupid. But all right, we have a vision of the world which is just materialistic evolution, where the descendants of ape creatures that came down out of the trees. And really, we should only be thinking about where can we find fruit and roadkill. Why are we bothering with all this philosophy when we could be using our thoughts for just looking for fruit and It's I could make a case that these philosophers, these man apes gathered around the bottom of the trees discussing philosophies, are merely cats chasing their own tail. So that's the thing. If we think that the mind is a product of Darwinistic evolution, it's going to be full of what you use a term for, lacunae. It's going to be full of holes. We might be thinking we're going along fine until we fall down one of the mental holes. There's not a completeness there. Now, the Christian legend talks about man, and the story suggests, well, there's a degree of completeness there. This man's not going to be full of too many holes because he's a product of God. But the atheists never think of this. They think, oh, yeah, I'm brilliant, I'm man. Yeah, you're brilliant until the moment you fall down the lacuna. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it's something that I know we're wrapping up here. It's something that Nietzsche proposes as one of his meta messages. We're so used to thinking ourselves as the end product, the creation, whether of God or of evolution. This is the destination. We've arrived. And now we can evaluate ourselves as though we're a coherent species. But evolution takes place over millions of years. And our species has only been around for 200, 300,000 years. We don't know much about the behavior of the species that we descended from. They might have been more coherent than we are. And we might not be an end product of anything. We might be half-baked. We might be unfinished, half raw dough in the oven. Someday we'll be a cookie, but we are not there yet. It could be that we were never meant in our current state to be an ongoing concern. We're meant to keep changing into a future species that will be a viable, healthy species. But we're like a bridge on the way to getting there, maybe, if things work out well. And this is one of the central points that Nietzsche makes in his entire philosophy. This idea of the Übermensch is not the idea that some men are better than other men, which is how the Nazis took it, but that maybe none of us is fully baked. And we should be thinking about what would a better species look like that had its crap together in a way that we don't. What are the things when he says man is a problem that must be overcome? What are the problems that we have that a healthier species would not have? And even if we are still stuck where we are, if we know what those things are, then like with my alcoholic gene, we could compensate for those holes. We can at least know there's a hole there. Don't step in it. That's a part of our character that's broken. Walk around it and we'll be all right. But if we just blithely have faith that to be human is to be perfect and to have this is what Stephen's saying, right? If we just assume that to have a human mind is to have a logical, sophisticated, clear mind that processes truth instead of what it actually is, then we're like the alcoholic who thinks he doesn't have a problem, right? We are setting ourselves up for disaster through our lack of self-knowledge. And then this goes back to Sharon's question. They're all tying together. Thank you, Stephen. You've tied the whole 3 hours together, because then that takes us back to the question of what is faith? And faith, if there is a really important, vital thing that we're trying to evolve into that could have a justified faith, like the cheetah's faith in the race, in the chase, that works for cheetahs, and it even works for the gazelles, right? The gazelles stay healthy as a species because the cheetah is picking off the sick ones, right? Not the healthiest ones. The species is improving. That balance, that harmony that works. Maybe there is something to come in the species to follow, in which, again, faith can be can play a critical role, in which you could naively have faith. But where we are, our faith has to be augmented with self-knowledge to
Well,
make sure that it doesn't.
the faith that the Wizard of Oz has the answers.
Yes. Yes. And the importance of distinguishing the Wizard of Oz from a god and saying, maybe the Wizard of Oz doesn't have the answers, but a god was. Maybe the god has the answers, but we better be careful not to mistake these various con men.
And the institutions will solve all the problems.
Right. Right. So when is fideism about putting your eggs in the right basket, and when is it about putting your eggs in whatever basket you happen to be holding, whether it's the right basket or the wrong basket? Really, English should have two completely different words for these two functions. It's like having a one word means food and the other word means poison, and it's good that you've got a separate word that means poison. We'd be in real trouble if the same word meant food and poison. But that's, what Kenneth is arguing in this chapter so far is that's kind of where we are with faith. We have the one word, and into it we put both the sick faith and the healthy faith, and now we don't even know what we're talking about from one sentence to the next. It makes authentic religion difficult. Yeah, wisdom, says Donna. This is why wisdom plays such a critical role in Homo sapiens. Anyway, I hope you all had a lovely time. I certainly did. As Ari says, these are the highlights of my week. I'm really glad to spend this time with you all and talk about all this stuff together, explore it. You all rock. Thank you. And we'll see you next Monday. Have a great week, everyone.
Have happy Easter.
Happy Easter, Sharon.
Yes.